Hey everybody, welcome to Draft Night. Matthew Coller here, and yes, the NFL Draft is finally upon us, and there's already been a flyover in Kansas City. And I gotta say, I'm pretty amazed, even every year as this thing grows and grows and grows, to see the number of fans who show up to hear names read. But it has turned into one of the biggest parties and the best events of the year. And tonight, the Minnesota Vikings hold the number 23 overall pick, and whether they actually stay at the 23 overall pick, I have no idea, but we're going to find out throughout the night. So here's what we got going on. I mean, first, we have crazy things happening today. Lamar Jackson is off the market, so there is no more conversation that we get to have and debates about whether the Minnesota Vikings should go after Lamar Jackson, but also a very strange thing happening between the Arizona Cardinals and Philadelphia Eagles with tampering in the hiring of Jonathan Gannon. There's always strange things that happen on draft day. It also appears, according to all reports, that CJ Stroud will go number 2, Bryce Young will go number 1, and where Anthony Richardson goes from there is anybody's guess. And it seems like there is buzz that it's possible that he could drop or that Will Levis could be at the top. I was watching Ian Rappaport earlier on today, and he was talking about if Anthony Richardson is not taken at number 4 overall, that it's altogether possible he could slide down the board. He could be the quarterback who slides. And there was a look the other day I saw that someone did about where certain quarterbacks were expected to go and how every year there was one that dropped down the board. And as any of these guys do tonight, it becomes more and more intriguing for the Vikings. So, of course, every quarterback being connected to the Vikings during draft season, and that's our top storyline, of course, for tonight. But also, will the Vikings trade down? Could they target a receiver? Will they go after a cornerback, which is, I think, clearly their top need, if not number 2 need? Or will we just sit here and talk to each other for a couple hours and have no pick at all because they move down to the second round? There's a lot of intrigue, I think, with this Vikings draft, and maybe more than other years. Just the simple fact that it's hard to predict. In past years when they were really going for it, I think we could always tell, like, okay, well, they've got a need at corner. They've got a need at receiver. They've got a need at center. They've got a need at tackle. And these are the positions that they're going to address. And I don't know the last time that we were really shocked by a draft pick that the Vikings made early on. Maybe you have to go back to them picking Teddy Bridgewater, if that was a surprise when they traded back into the first round, I think with the 32nd pick in 2014. But it has been a while. You can leave in the comments, tell me when the last time that you were shocked by a Minnesota Vikings draft pick was. I want to say also, before we get too deep into this, just welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Feel free to jump in the comments. I will put them up on the screen, and we'll have this be a conversation throughout the night between you Vikings fans and myself. I've got the TV right in front of me, bringing you a Vikings angle, though, to everything here that we've built up to over weeks and weeks, going back to the combine. So also, it's so great. I know a lot of you from one thing or another, whether it's subscribing or Twitter or whatever else. So it's so great to see you guys joining here. And I feel like I've gotten to know you guys over the years. So great to see you, and stay active in the comments, talk to each other, talk to me. And yes, Alex, I will have guests tonight. Should be actually coming on soon. Just as you asked that, Andrew Krammer is popping into the window here. I see him logging in shortly. So we'll get him in here and get going. But Andrew Krammer, Will Ragatz are supposed to both join from TCO Performance Center. And then Paul Hodowanic will make a special appearance later on in the night as we react to whatever the Vikings do. And yes, to your question, Daniel, we do have the Diet Dr. Pepper here. Although now, so last draft, I think you guys challenged me to drink like an entire 12-pack in 2 days, and that was not hard at all. But tonight, I'm going to be sitting here for a while, so I'm going to limit the Diet Dr. Pepper consumption. Jonathan Harrison is producing, by the way, tonight. So the scroll you see is via Jonathan. He's going to drop in as well with what's happening on social media, because I can't do 7 things at once and watch Twitter. So he's keeping his eye on Twitter and reactions to everything happening. And joining us now is from TCO Performance Center in what we call the closet. Andrew Krammer from the Star Tribune. Welcome, Andrew. How about that flyover? I was blown away by what we have here for the NFL draft.
Every year I'm blown away how many people show up. Kansas City looks like a mob down there. There's just as many people, Matt, you're missing it at the Vikings Media Center here. So
yeah, no, I don't doubt it. And but I'm ready to go. I got my Taco Bell and I'm prepared for this entire thing. Now, throughout the day, I guess I was expecting like, hey, is there going to be some rumors, some Vikings connections to this, that, and the other thing? Only just a little. Ian Rappaport saying that Anthony Richardson could be the quarterback that drops if he gets by number 4, and then the Vikings start to come into play. Are you buying that quarterback is on the table here for the Vikings tonight?
100%, absolutely. And I think that's the most fascinating part about this entire offseason, the way they've gone about the Kirk Cousins situation, leaving him in limbo this offseason here, doing all the homework that we've heard about behind the scenes here locally and reported nationally about this quarterback class. If CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson starts to fall in that top 10, it is going to get very interesting here, because I would very much bet on them wanting to move up to grab specifically one of those two guys, assuming that Bryce Young is the first overall pick.
Where I've never really bought into it was the Will Levis or Hendon Hooker connections with the Vikings, although we have seen some major mockers, if there is such a thing as major mockers. But we've seen a lot of those connections, and the Hendon Hooker especially. But I've never gotten around to that. I guess that there is some sort of talk me into game with Hendon Hooker, maybe more than Will Levis. I feel like a team in front of the Vikings will fall in love with him. I'm not sure they want to mortgage their future to trade up to get him, with some of the issues with, he wasn't statistically all that successful, and, he wasn't that accurate. Maybe didn't even have the best pro day, which I know might not matter to us, but matters to them. And Hendon Hooker is an interesting idea, though, because intelligence, accuracy, he's got some athleticism to him. What are you believing here?
Well, the question is, who do they have first-round grades on? And I think they could like Hendon Hooker for all the reasons that you just mentioned, but whether or not they view him worthy of that 23rd overall pick is a completely different question. And I don't get the sense that they do. I don't get the sense that they view anybody outside of those top 3 quarterbacks as worthy of one of these top picks this year. And so that's why those are the 3 to watch, with Young, Stroud, and Richardson. I know you see Levis up there. I know you see like Hooker being a late riser too in this draft. But I wouldn't be shocked if we see Hendon Hooker, for instance, not even be a first-round pick, in a way that like people thought Malik Willis was just this lock to be a first-round pick last year, and he waited till the 3rd round. Sometimes people just have it way off on some guys. And I'm not saying that they do on Hendon Hooker. It's a possibility. I just know the Vikings don't love him as much as some of these mocks would suggest.
Yeah, and I've always kind of felt like when you just look at Hendon Hooker and his profile of an older quarterback, put up great stats in a wide open offense, but is not ever really considered one of those top quarterbacks, usually that's a 2nd round type of guy, like that is intriguing enough to take in the 2nd round. But the thing that the Vikings, I'm sure, are considering here is that this is the first quarterback taken, if they're going to do it, with Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell. This is your big shot. Your future rests on this. Are you doing it for a guy who is his age and has the ACL thing and will be way behind in terms of development of younger quarterbacks? Lamar Jackson signs his contract today. The man is 1 year older than Hendon Hooker, and he is signing his 2nd contract. I just don't feel like you can really put all your eggs in that basket. And unless it's Anthony Richardson, because I think CJ Stroud's going to go number 2 overall. So unless it's Anthony Richardson, I don't think they're doing it. But my gosh, if it's Anthony Richardson, Andrew, have you considered your StarTribune.com subscriptions and click numbers if it's Anthony Richardson? Because trust me, I have for Purple Insider.
It would be, that would be the splash that everybody's been waiting for. That certainly you have been talking about for a long time in the Kirk Cousins era for the Vikings. But that would be the ultimate franchise sea change and title change for them, because this is a new regime, as you mentioned, that is it's crazy to think, but 17 months ago, they weren't even hired. So it really was 16 months ago they got put together, and here they are trying to put their second draft class together, and there will be no draft pick more important than the one they make on Kirk Cousins' successor, whenever that is, if that's this year or if that's next year in 2024. And I think it's important to note that if Richardson flies off the board right after Stroud or before Stroud, all those guys are gone. I also think they're very open to waiting until 2024 to find that successor and maybe even revisiting things with Kirk Cousins on a deal beyond this year.
Yeah, okay, don't say that. But not after we've had all of these very exciting discussions about Trey Lance and Anthony Richardson and Lamar Jackson for like a week there. And then, oh, wait, they're just going to extend Cousins. But that does seem like an unlikely scenario because on short deals for the head coach and the GM, I think they understand that they have to at some point pick somebody who's going to be their guy to build around and go forward with that. And also, if you're Kevin O'Connell, I mean, you got to pick a quarterback at some point, right? You can't just be the former quarterback head coach and just let everybody go off the board for 2 straight years, or stick with Kirk Cousins when you kind of know what the ceiling is, his age, his price, all those things that we've talked about so many times. It's just whether it's going to happen tonight or into the future. And I think if it's not Richardson, it probably does happen into the future, which means that we also have to talk about these other scenarios. And a friend of mine, Vikings fan, texted me today and basically said, I'm ready to be bored tonight. That even so, we're sitting here like all hyped up. We did the flyover. I had Taco Bell, like we're ready to go. And it could just be that we get down the board close to 23. Oh, the Saints are calling, or some other team, the Texans are calling. They want to move up to take somebody. Vikings are dropping back, and we all kind of go, oh, okay. But I think that's okay. Like, I think that's a good idea because they need players. It's just not as exciting.
Yeah, look, they've got 2 picks in the top 100 right now, 23 and 87 overall. And I got pressed, or, you know how the radio interviews go where they're like, predict what's going to happen, pick something. And I think the most likely scenario is they trade back, accumulate another day 2 pick, maybe trade back to the end of this first round if a team like Kansas City or Buffalo is looking to move up, and try to get more of that capital. And really, I'm looking at those top 100 picks. I think they would love another bite at that apple in that kind of group, because I don't know how deep this draft is beyond that. And that's really where they're lacking right now. They've got, one in the 4th, 5th, or 6th rounds, but they just don't have a second rounder, and that third rounder, they're waiting a while for it. So they need more talent on this roster, more talent on this depth chart. And to your point, we might be a little bored tonight.
The chat is very dubious about my Taco Bell Diet Dr. Pepper combination, but I'll be okay. Basically, that's all that I ever eat, so we're good here. The Panthers are on the clock. I'm sure it's going to be Bryce Young. It's probably been Bryce Young for months, and then they had to kind of build it like, ooh, could it be somebody else? Like, probably wasn't. So before I let you go and you get back to your draft coverage, and we'll have Will Ragatz popping in as well, Paul Hodowanic, who I see is watching, and he'll be jumping on later on in the evening, and then we'll get your chat up here on the screen as well. If it comes down to if they're going to pick at 23, corner, wide receiver, edge rusher, defensive tackle. I mean, intern Haley was telling me today that she became very knowledgeable about the draft because their Vikings need so many positions. I'm like, yeah, no, that's right. It is anything but offensive tackle. The only offensive tackle I know is Skoronski because his name is Skoronski, and that's it. But which one of those directions do you think that they would go, or that they need the most?
Yeah, I think it's got to be defense. And the thing is, when you get to 23 and you run through so many ways this draft could fall, it often seems like, boy, one of these top receivers is left for them. And it's really easy to say, sure, I'll give them a Quentin Johnston or a Jordan Addison. But I think if that scenario fell, it would make a ton of sense for them to want to trade back and try to get one of these corners that falls a little bit later, whether it's an Emmanuel Forbes out of Mississippi State, or some of these other guys that Joey Porter seems to be losing some steam, which is interesting, out of Penn State. But corner, I think, is just the one that it's huge. And if it's not corner, it's probably an interior position like interior linebacker, interior defensive line, where they lost Dalvin Tomlinson and we're not talking about it. Nobody seems to be talking about that massive absence in the middle of a defensive front that was already not that great with him. So yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if one of these defensive tackles falls to them. One of the corners, maybe they pick the 4th or 5th corner. They just need to restock this defense. And Brian Flores does not have a ton to work with right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is not the year to kind of need a nose tackle type like Dalvin Tomlinson, but maybe Kalijah Kancey is interesting. And I think that there's a lot of ways they can win. And just I'll leave you on this. What would they do tonight to get an A from the Star Tribune contingency as you guys huddle up? Mark, I'm sure you got Chip or Suhan or everybody. You probably got a team of like 18 people out there. You're going to huddle up. You're going to decide on one grade. What would get an A from the Strip?
It would have to be making a move. If they sit pat at 23 and we're talking about, boy, they just have 4 picks, 1 pick tomorrow on Friday, and they got the 4th corner that was available and they didn't do much beyond that. That's kind of blah, right? But if they move up and get the franchise cornerstone in Anthony Richardson, or they move back and get another pick tomorrow on top of getting a player first round caliber at a position of need here, I think moving either direction and trying to capitalize on somebody else's need or filling a major need of your own at quarterback would get the top marks. But sitting pat, I don't think they're going to do it. And that would, I think, get the lowest grade from the Star Tribune crew for whatever it's worth.
The Star Tribune Illuminati or whatever. So, yeah, for me, if it's a wide receiver at 23, I'll probably give him an A. And because I feel like that is a driving force to actually competing for a championship and setting up because it's offense is going to win for you, right? And I feel like a partner for Justin Jefferson or a potential replacement for KJ Osborne, who could leave after this year, which probably doesn't get brought up enough that he's in the last year of his contract. Those things would get an A for me. I don't know if corner would, because I feel like the difference between a Deonte Banks and Emmanuel Forbes may not be that much. So probably moving back is better. Linebacker, Bijan Robinson, nose tackle, anything like that is going to raise a lot of eyebrows from the analytics GM. So, Andrew, they're going to make the pick here shortly, so I'll let you go. Andrew Krammer, Star Tribune. Thanks for doing this, man. Thanks for popping in from TCO Performance Center. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Enjoy the Taco Bell.
Yeah, for sure. Of course, the chat wants to know what the Taco Bell order was. It was a ranch chipotle burrito and just a hard shell taco. I'm not crazy, guys. I mean, just, your normal stuff. People are always talking about like, oh, well, did it make you sick to your stomach? Like, I don't know. It's just chicken and like lettuce and cheese. What are we talking about here? Anyway, so the pick is in for the Carolina Panthers. And we need to talk about this a little bit for the Panthers, because when a team trades up and they months in advance or weeks in advance, we all get kind of bored of that discussion. So if we pretended that it happened right now, we would be saying, oh, wow, okay, what? They're trading up. They're going for it. They're bringing in their quarterback. And if you go kind of back to last year and think about how like the NFC looked as far as quarterbacks go. And this is not a guarantee that Bryce Young will be great. I have no idea if he will or not. Steve hitting me hard with a C- grade on my order. Look, man, I'm not trying to eat something too heavy before a stream. Okay. Just a little snack, more or less. Anyway, the point about the Panthers is that the NFC has the potential to change here a bit with the quarterbacks. Like, think about, especially if Atlanta makes some sort of move at quarterback. If Atlanta were to land Anthony Richardson, if the whole thing about Desmond Ridder was a bluff, and the Panthers now have Bryce Young, if Atlanta improves their situation, the Saints are all of a sudden better, that the NFC suddenly starts to look a little more interesting from a quarterback perspective. And there it is, officially from Roger Goodell. Bryce Young is the next Carolina Panthers quarterback to follow such great Carolina Panthers quarterback draft picks as Kerry Collins and Chris Winkie and, oh yeah, Cam Newton as well. But I think Bryce Young is, I mean, if we were grading prospect comparisons to top overall draft picks ever, I don't think that as far as a prospect, he goes as high as somebody like Cam Newton, for example, or as an Andrew Luck or even a Trevor Lawrence. I think it's probably a step below that because of his height. But as far as the pedigree goes, I mean, this is a guy who was absolutely phenomenal at Alabama. He's a playmaker. The highlight reel is incredible. He can run. And one thing that was pointed out throughout the draft process that I had heard from some people as well is that Bryce Young also has incredible intelligence and processing ability. So if you put him on a team here in Carolina that is, lacking supremely good weapons, you have Adam Thielen there. They traded away DJ Moore, but I think you're talking about the potential for that team that's been building up their defense for a couple of years to be quite good in a year and somebody to watch, because the Matt Rule era, well, it was quite bad. That usually results in a lot of high draft picks, including this, or having an opportunity to trade up and get Bryce Young and restart from where they are. But it's not a complete rebuild. Their cupboard is not totally empty. And this is something to think about even for the Vikings for next season. That, I mean, you're talking about, a situation where the Vikings could end up on kind of the outside looking in, trying to make a trade up. Now, maybe Caleb Williams won't be available, but this could be a situation that we're kind of looking at and thinking about for the future with the Vikings trying to make a trade up like this. So that puts Houston on the clock. And it's likely to be CJ Stroud, I think, because Houston is another team that's been bad for so long and needs some way to compete. And coincidentally, the only division in the AFC that does not have, mind-blowingly great quarterbacks is the AFC South. And you actually have a chance. Now we'll see what Trevor Lawrence becomes, but you actually have a chance if you're the Texans to win your division, unlike the AFC East that has Josh Allen and has, now Aaron Rodgers there. But it's a good point that it is Houston. Yes, I agree with that point that it is Houston. It just seems so logical, though. They have another first-round pick. They have an early second-round draft pick that they would go with a quarterback here, fill other spots as they go along. But would we be surprised if they decided to go another direction? I would not be shocked. But, I mean, this seems so obvious. They have had, since Deshaun Watson, just absolutely nothing at the quarterback position. Davis Mills, just a total space filler, essentially. So, I think that they should go CJ Stroud. The pick is in at the moment, but I guess Bryce Young going to the Panthers and finally seeing it does make you think about the future of the NFC with quarterbacks. And now if the Texans do take CJ Stroud, then he is, going to go over to the AFC. And I think you sort of dodge a bullet a little bit if you're the Vikings from having another really good prospect. And then stuff gets really interesting if this is indeed CJ Stroud, because then we're talking about, where does Anthony Richardson go? Is the Arizona Cardinals going to make a trade for somebody that wants to trade up and take Anthony Richardson? How does the NFL really feel about Will Levis? I think something we always know is that we don't know how the league really feels about these players leading into the draft. And I mean, just even in the lead up to the draft, I heard so many conflicting things about Will Levis, where some people said, well, he's completely inaccurate and you can't pick him. And then, at other times people said, his raw skill is so high that you want to take a chance. And, David, I do think that a kicker will get drafted this weekend, but hopefully it's not by the Vikings, because they have so few picks that would not be a good idea. So we're waiting on the Texans to pick here. And as far as the chat goes, always feel free to jump in with your comments, your questions. I'm keeping an eye on that all night. And so, anything that you want to ask, or, of course, jokes are always welcome. Reactions, hot takes, anything you got. From Lambo Moon here, let's bring some optimism today. Last year's draft was disappointing, but let's see what Kwesi, Kevin, and Brian are going to do this time. Maybe they'll surprise everyone. I think that there's so many different ways that the Vikings could go here, but I don't think that you can look at last year and say, okay, well, they don't know what they're doing in the draft. I think that they went into last year saying, we want to trade down. We want to get as many draft picks as we possibly can in our first draft and load up some really key parts of that roster. And one was the secondary. I mean, the secondary was a disaster. And I would question picking a safety as high as they did, but at the same time, Harrison Smith and his age, having a partner next to him for a final year or two, and then becoming that guy, that key part of the secondary, you could see why they did it. But loading up the secondary made a lot of sense last year. It's just that the immediate results were so poor from last season, and also reaching on a guard as they did, that if you're looking at it right now to grade the Vikings draft from last year, it's not very good. Okay, so let's see. Do we have to stop with the Hendon Hooker jokes after tonight? Only if you want to. I mean, if he goes to the Vikings, those jokes are not going to stop at all for us. But yeah, I mean, remember Hendon Hooker's first draft back in 1984. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, it's CJ Stroud, everybody. CJ Stroud taken by the Houston Texans. And I got to say that this is a weird feeling because the Houston Texans appear to know what they're doing. It has been a long time since anyone could say that they know what they're doing. But I think DeMeco Ryans their new coach, and they hired Bobby Slowick as their offensive coordinator from San Francisco. I think he was their quarterback coach or pass game coordinator, whatever it might be. And I think that this team is going to implement a play action system. They're going to add weapons here in this draft, that they have a coach who has a really good background in terms of defense. Like, Houston could actually turn this thing around pretty quickly. And that's sort of something that we talk about all the time, where you're always one thing away from flipping the switch as a franchise. And this could be it. I also want to say too, that I get that teams seem to try hard behind the scenes to leak cognition tests and everything else to try to get CJ Stroud to drop. Let's all remember this. I know that we get amnesia as soon as the draft is over. We forget all the nonsense from the buildup and everything else. But CJ Stroud is an absolutely phenomenal quarterback prospect. And if the Vikings had had any chance at him, then I would have said, what a home run for this player. I mean, I don't helmet scout, by the way. I mean, I don't really scout at all. I just read all the scouts. But no one should look at helmets for players and say, oh, well, this guy played at, Ohio State, or it used to be USC when they had a couple bust quarterbacks. It was, well, you can't take a USC quarterback, whatever else. I think CJ Stroud is a much better prospect than Dwayne Haskins. And I think he is a better thrower by far. I don't even think it's close, than Justin Fields. And what was amazing to me throughout the season when I watched CJ Stroud is his anticipation in throwing, his pocket presence, his ability to move around, not necessarily taking off and running. But I think in a system that San Francisco runs, a lot of play actions, bootlegs, things like that, and then this guy can make some throws downfield. I mean, this could really turn around the entire Houston Texans organization. And I just would not put anything into a test that I don't even know how, what it is supposed to tell you. I read up on it, and my understanding is even the percentages that get leaked are not telling for what this test is used for, that teams like to use it to understand better about how people learn and how they see the field and how they see, how their brain works. Right. And so they can design things, how they teach that player and so forth, in order to, help coach them better. So somebody who is just, not doing a perfect score, not producing a perfect score on a cognition test and leaking that out, which we don't even know is completely true, just totally silly. And everybody keep that in mind. I won't rant on it much more. I like CJ Stroud a ton, and I think it'll be really interesting how he fits in with an organization that is doing, or that did do, the full tank, the full rebuild. It's always interesting to kind of see that, because they have kind of an empty cupboard, but they're going to rebuild around CJ Stroud and a really good coach. The PI banner, the Purple Insider banner, is a little crooked. I could blame the angle of the camera, but I'm not. That was me. I put it up. What do you expect? I'm a person that goes to Taco Bell and drinks nothing but Diet Dr. Pepper. I don't have precision. So anyway, the Cardinals are on the board here. And are they actually going to make the pick? Or are the Vikings going to trade 3 firsts to get Anthony Richardson? Now, this is what I did in a draft simulation right before the draft, if any of you guys listened to that podcast. And I don't think it's all that realistic for the Vikings to go all in and make some insane trade where they give up all of their draft capital for the rest of time. What do we got, Jonathan? Do we got some breaking news here?
We do. Adam Schefter just breaking it on the ESPN broadcast. Houston traded back up to number 3 to take that pick from them. And so they will draft twice in the top 3.
Wow. Okay. Thanks, Jonathan. That's Jonathan, by the way, everyone. If you don't know, Jonathan Harrison, producer at Purple Insider, and he's going to be sitting in that little box all night long and keeping an eye on what's going on, listening to the TV broadcast and popping in and giving us some breaking news. But how about the Houston Texans? See, this is a thing. I have to say that this is the thing when it comes to the Vikings in the last few years. And I know like it was a fun season and everything else, but I mean, the idea of a team that has so much draft capital and so much cap space and an opening a quarterback position, like here's me getting excited about the Texans and feeling actually quite jealous of the Texans. Who would have thought? Like that's draft night for you, right? Sometimes there's gas mask bongs and sometimes you're jealous of the Texans. I mean, things change fast. Life comes at you fast, but the Texans trading up here with Arizona, and I guess we'll get the details exactly on the trade short enough. When Jonathan has them, he'll pop back in and give us the details on this trade. But this is a fascinating move, and I've got to think that this is to take either Tyree Wilson or to take Will Anderson because they need defense. They need everything. And there's no other prospects that rank this highly unless they were going to draft Anthony Richardson and trade him to somebody else. I don't know. That would be maybe too crazy for draft night, but I think a pass rusher here makes so much sense. I have always liked the idea of Will Anderson at the top. I mean, I don't know if that's who they're going to do, who they're going to take or not, but Will Anderson to me was one of those where people tried to kind of knock him down a little bit. Oh, he didn't have this quickness number or he didn't have this 40, but I mean, he was an absolute monster at Alabama. And I'm taking my bets with pass rushers who are absolute monsters from Alabama. I think that's a pretty safe way to go. But we'll see, because Tyree Wilson, the interesting thing about him is that he has this crazy profile, like outrageous wingspan, speed, quickness. I mean, he kind of has the high ceiling that teams are looking for at the top. What do we got, Jonathan?
All right, so Cardinals will get the 12th overall pick. So they just swapped other first round picks. 33, a first in 2024, a third in 2024. The Texans will jump up to 3 and they'll get pick 105.
Okay. That's a lot. That is a lot.
I was just saying Will Anderson.
Okay. And Will Anderson. Yeah. It makes so much sense. Again, this goes for draft season, right? I mean, by the way, the Cardinals doing something competent. Who would have thought on the same day that the Cardinals had to trade draft capital because they tampered, and the same probably organization that falls to the very bottom of worst in the NFL with the Texans now doing competent things actually makes a pretty good trade here for Arizona, a team that desperately needs talent on their side, and getting number 33 and number 12 for them to move up. I mean, wow, that is some kind of haul to go up and get Will Anderson. And I will say again, Will Anderson is a phenomenal prospect. I mean, just from even last year, one of the best defensive prospects that there's been to come out, I think, in a while. And I could see why, they wanted to go up and get that foundational piece. But I have to say, if you're an Arizona Cardinals fan, well, first of all, bless you, that's tough. But if you're an Arizona Cardinals fan, you have to be thrilled with this, to be able to move back, to still get a very good potential player at number 12 overall to get another one just outside of the first round. And as we're always trying throughout the night to tie everything we can into the Minnesota Vikings, I mean, I would say that the price of trading up being this high, now it doesn't apply the same as to 23, but if the Vikings want to trade up and that's the price, I don't know if they could possibly match the price in any way, right? And yet, you know what? And I'm sorry, I've been just staring at the TV here, and I want to make sure to get your guys' comments in here. But to Daniel, how did Kwesi get robbed so bad last year? I have to say that not getting at least another first-round draft pick last year looks worse right now. It does. It just does. Because this is essentially, like, when you're talking about moving 12 and 33 is almost the first-round pick. I mean, right outside the first round. And then another one from next year to move up. I mean, it is, when you're moving up into the top 5, it is quite different from 32 to 12. But that is an unbelievable haul for them. And for the Vikings to get nowhere near that last year, nowhere near even a first-round pick for the following season, that is pretty rough. Let's see. Richardson to Indianapolis. We'll see. I mean, does anything make more sense than that, though? I mean, they brought over the Philadelphia offensive coordinator. That's a guy who saw a tremendous athlete transition into a great passer while he was a pro in Jalen Hurts. They had all sorts of running plays that they designed for Jalen Hurts where he was excellent with that. And with Anthony Richardson, it just fits perfectly with them. They have been a team that has, over the last few years, just taken a swing after swing at trying to get these veteran quarterbacks, you know, your Carson Wentz, your Phillip Rivers, your Matt Ryan, and it's just been complete failure year after year. I mean, I guess Phillip Rivers wasn't a complete failure. They made the playoffs, but the last 2 years, the last 2 swings at that, it's time to draft a quarterback and put him into the best situation with a coach that has worked with running quarterback before. It would make a lot of sense, but we'll see. I mean, maybe they want Will Levis. Maybe they want the big armed guy instead of Anthony Richardson, but I just don't know how you can possibly pass up on Anthony Richardson if you're the Indianapolis Colts. And yeah, Len, I totally get you that the Vikings were not trading the number 3 overall pick. I totally agree, but they didn't come with even the stratosphere in trading down all the way to 32 last year of even getting a first round pick. I mean, that's not even remotely close to what Arizona was just able to do. And I know that it's a little apples to oranges. I totally agree. But I also think that if you're looking at that trade and going, wow, usually when teams are desperate and they really want to move up like that, they have to give up a next year's first. And to not get that, maybe they should have just taken the pick at the time. Although, Jameson Williams was gambling or something and got suspended. So I don't know. That would have been my pick at that time. Maybe it wouldn't have been theirs, but it does feel like when you look at that trade, that's what you expect, right? That we would have expected that trade that the Vikings did last year to just yield more than it did. So it looks like Anthony Richardson from you guys in the chat is going to go to Indianapolis here. The pick is in. I mean, look, Anthony Richardson's been one of my most enjoyable prospects to follow, I think, over the years in a while. So I really enjoyed watching him play. I never thought the Vikings actually had a chance at him, to be honest with you, but I really enjoyed watching him play last year. And I know that his completion percentage was not as high as other quarterbacks. I would also implore you to go back and look at the team that he played for, the wide receivers that he had, and the offensive system that he was playing in. I think that he does have things he needs to fix, but he is so much fun as a player. And let's also keep in mind here that, as we talked about with Bryce Young, the Carolina Panthers are set up in a great way with Bryce Young in the NFC. If you think about this from a Vikings perspective, the AFC just got more great quarterback prospects. With Anthony Richardson going to the Indianapolis Colts, they now have somebody who could potentially, and I'm not saying he will for sure, but potentially compete with the Mahomes, the Josh Allens, the Joe Burrows, and CJ Stroud, who I don't think has quite as high of a ceiling. They can also build around him. And that's 2 more AFC teams. I mean, the AFC and their quarterback situation is so out of control with 2 more top prospects going there that this is already, and I know it would have been better if the Vikings were able to get Anthony Richardson. Would have been better that way than not. But I think this is a good night for the Vikings already in that way, in the fact that they do not have to have CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson coming into the NFC. From Angela here, wondering who people are more nervous about us drafting, Hooker or Levis. That's a great question. I think that Levis is probably a better prospect overall. And if the Vikings did that, then, I mean, you kind of have your Matthew Stafford-ish type prospect, but I think that Miles' answer is correct. It's both. I think that's right. I think it is both. Let's see. All right, let's see. Are we going to be the 4 or 5 with quarterbacks? Yeah, I mean, here's the thing too. Keep this in mind that through the years, and again, I mean, I think that all 3 of these prospects are just tremendous. All 3 of them. I think it was a great year for quarterback prospects, and there was always going to be knocks and everything else, but all 3 of them could be stars. But it's not always the first guy or the second guy who becomes the best quarterback from a class. So if the Vikings evaluate Levis or Hooker as a first-round pick and they take them tonight, then I don't think that the odds are so much crazier that Levis or Hooker or whoever they take could be just as good or better than these other prospects. I look at Richardson and it was always a pipe dream. And this is what happens and why it's so crushing when you go on the first round out in the playoffs, because you won so many games that you're not drafting high enough to be in the conversation for a quarterback like this. But, I think that you could still make it work though. You could still make it work if those guys actually are first round prospects. I'm a little dubious on that. I'm not entirely convinced that they are the same level prospect as these 3. I think that the Will Levis hype might be kind of Drew Lock-ish. If you guys remember how Drew Lock was, really highly thought of in the draft community, and they loved his big arm and everything else. And they said, well, don't worry about this, that, or the other thing. And, it turned out that he was more of a second round prospect. Let's see, just back to the chat here. Let's see, from 28 Dead Poet, difference between Richardson, Lance, and Joe Webb. Well, come on, man. That's not a serious comment. The difference, one, is that Richardson and Lance were evaluated by the NFL, and the NFL believed that they were top 4 draft picks, meaning that they had the potential to become superstar quarterbacks. That was not Joe Webb. I mean, that's, when we're talking about accuracy and things like that and throwing, a lot of times, we talk about these guys as if they could never get better at anything. And we've just seen this so many times. And right on TV right now, they're making this comparison between Anthony Richardson and Donovan McNabb. I like that a lot. I mean, I think that's much closer to, some people are asking, what's the difference between him and Malik Willis? Like 3 rounds is the difference. The difference is that NFL teams believe this guy can be a superstar when they've had everyone in their organization look at everything he can do. They believe he could be Donovan McNabb, and I believe them. So that's the difference. Joe Webb was never a serious quarterback, and Anthony Richardson most certainly is. But I mean, if you read Ted Wynn from The Athletic, and he went through what Anthony Richardson was improving in the process, it has become so much more scientific. There were long beliefs of, well, you can't improve accuracy, which again, totally bogus. I mean, there's been all sorts of quarterbacks who have throughout the years. Even undersized quarterbacks is not just freak athletes, but someone like Drew Brees got more and more and more accurate as he went along. So there's a lot of those situations where we've seen it through the years and guys improve. I would say Kirk Cousins is way more accurate today than he was when he first came into the league. So a lot of guys can, depends on how hard you work at it. But also we have data that can analyze. You ever go to one of those golf places where, and I've done this, and guess what? my swing wasn't that good. You go to a golf place and they can digitally analyze your swing. You can, if you are a pitcher, you can go and have your throwing motion digitally analyzed for maximum whatever. And you could do that as a quarterback as well. We are much more scientific about improving accuracy than we ever have been before. And when you add that athletic element to it, that he is a just complete freak athlete, an all-time great athlete, I think that you would take your chances on Anthony Richardson, or at least I would. So yeah, Jason, I wasn't expecting Joe Webb slander either. Joe Webb's a cool Viking though. That's the problem. Like that's the problem with bringing that up, is I don't want to downplay how cool Joe Webb was. The guy was playing like just a couple of years ago still on special teams or something. Let's see here. What is the possibility that Hunter gets used as trade capital tonight? There is not a possibility of that unless something absolutely crazy happens. But because if he is traded tonight, the Vikings would take a massive dead cap hit, and they're not in a position to do that. But after June 1st, that is much more possible that they would be willing to trade Danielle Hunter and get 2024 draft capital. So when we're doing this same live stream next year, we could say, hey, they've got 2 first-round picks tonight because they traded Danielle Hunter. But unfortunately, that can't happen tonight if they even wanted to be able to trade him. A third for Trey Lance sounds good to me. If you're San Francisco, and maybe they were blowing smoke a little bit, but if you're San Francisco, why would you trade Trey Lance to the Vikings for a 3rd round pick, right? I would almost be, if they were willing to accept that, I would say, no, I'm not doing it because I would be really concerned if they were willing to get rid of Trey Lance for so little after they gave up so much to get him. And I think it makes so much more sense for San Francisco to see what happens with their quarterback position. And then after that, after this year, then look at a potential to trade Trey Lance. I mean, his value is probably high right now among teams that are desperate for a quarterback, but don't you have to find out what you really have with Brock Purdy before you can get rid of Trey Lance? I think that you probably do. Let's see. Just let me scroll back up in the comments here. Let's see. Hate the thought of getting rid of Danielle Hunter. Yeah. I mean, I know, right? And then this is a team that it just is not in a position to move on from a lot of talent. But this is kind of the problem that they've created for themselves, is you have Danielle Hunter, who's a great player, but he is so expensive, or he's going to be. And he's also, you have to consider this, year after year, he's kind of allowed the Vikings to kick the can down the road on his contract. So his initial contract was bad, and the last few years, they have not gone all in on an extension, which hasn't been favorable for him. And now we've reached the point where, hey, I got 10.5 sacks, top 10 PFF grade, everything else. It's time. It is time to put down $25, $27 million a year. And while Danielle Hunter is 28 years old, and I think that he's still in his prime, that is just so much money to give Danielle Hunter, where you need to be getting younger and you need to be getting cheaper. So Seattle's pick is in. Devin Witherspoon seems to be the guy that they're going to take. And, Seattle's a team that when we talk about moving on from Cousins, and there's always this conversation of, well, what are you going to do after? And the options become, all over the place after. But they're a good example of Seattle moved on from a Hall of Fame quarterback in Russell Wilson. I think it's very likely, especially if he bounces back under Sean Payton, that Russell Wilson makes the Hall of Fame. And if he doesn't, we're talking about still a Pro Bowler and one of the best quarterbacks of an era. And they moved on, and here they are with top draft picks that they got in that move, and they are building a team that looks like it could be very dangerous. We have not really discussed them a whole lot in the offseason as a team that's a threat to the Vikings, a threat in the playoffs. But so you have San Francisco out there, but they made the playoffs last year in Seattle, and now they're getting a top draft pick and they have more draft capital. Like, this is how it works. This is why we kind of bang that drum of, hey, you need to be able to stack draft capital because the level of prospects that these teams are picking is very high, or you're stacking even more if you're Arizona by moving back. So I think this is a really good pick for them. They also already have a star cornerback, so they're trying to load up here on the secondary, which Pete Carroll, hey, he did once upon a time before. I think Pete Carroll really, and that organization has really kind of shifted the narrative back on them, that for a little while, it looked like it was, a little suspect in the latter years of Russell Wilson, but now they're looking like, I think, a pretty smart team. Let's see. How realistic is that we do Gabe's trade with Delvin to acquire more draft capital? What you're referring to is, and thank you for listening, Gabe Henderson of Vikings Entertainment was on the show the other day, and he proposed that the Vikings trade Delvin Cook to try to get, I can't remember what it was, maybe another 3rd round pick, or trade Delvin in a 4th to get a 2nd. I'm sorry, you have to refresh me on what his exact trade was. But I think if they're trading Delvin Cook, it probably ends up happening tomorrow. That would be my guess, is that it ends up going down tomorrow. That they probably won't do it tonight. And I apologize. I will wait until they say it on TV till I say it. I saw it in the chat and jumped the gun there, but I won't ruin any more picks. I'll make sure that I'm not Adam Scheftering everyone, and I will just I'll just wait. By the way, we're going to have Will Ragatz here at some point, probably, maybe like in the next 15, 20 minutes from SI.com, regular on the show. So we'll get him to kind of break down what's going on in the top 10. So keep your reactions and everything coming. So it was Delvin in a 4th for a 2nd. I mean, look, if someone's willing to do that, then the Vikings have to pull the trigger on that as fast as possible. I mean, you email as fast as you can into the league that's the trade if they're doing that. I just think, one of the things with football that I think football fans are really good at accepting, that I don't know on other sports if it's like this, is when it's over, it's over. And with Delvin Cook, that's just how it is. I mean, a great Vikings career, a tremendous running back for them, centerpiece of their offense for better or worse during the Mike Zimmer years, and he couldn't have done much more for them. But you get to a point where it's just not really feasible anymore with the contract, with the age, with the production. And I agree with you, Alex, that, I mean, if they were able to trade Delvin Cook and a 4th round pick to move up into the 2nd, even if it was the late 2nd, that would be a huge boost. Let's see. Do I think that with Levis, the only 1st round quarterback left, trading up will be more expensive as if when 2 quarterbacks would have fell if the Texans wouldn't have drafted Stroud? I think if the Vikings want to trade up to get Will Levis, it's going to cost them a lot. I mean, just based on, and I'm sure everybody is mad at the Arizona Cardinals and Houston Texans for pulling off that trade, because now the price just went up, right? To quote the Wire. What do we got, Jonathan? We got some breaking news.
Schefter reporting Arizona trading back up now to number 6. He hasn't said what the trade entails, but Arizona back on the clock.
Okay. Wow. Arizona wheeling and dealing. Now they do have a new general manager. And I think that this is very similar to what we saw Miami do a couple years ago, where they kind of dropped back and then moved back up. And I think it was Jalen Waddle that they took, and he's turned out to be a big star for them. I would guess that this has to be for a defensive player, maybe Tyree Wilson, but that's pretty wild. Also, Detroit continues to manage these things quite well. Detroit getting number 12 and 24. That's really good for Detroit to be able to get 2 quality prospects out of 34, but 2 quality picks out of this situation. I mean, one of the things you have to say, you have to look at Detroit and Brad Holmes and their general manager and say, that is what you want your general manager to be like. The way that Detroit has wheeled and dealed to build this team over a number of years. I mean, I think they have just done a tremendous job. Let's see. I scrolled a little too far away. Oh, here it was from Dustin. Will Levis about to fall down to the Vikings at 23. I mean, let's start talking about this a little bit, because if we look at the teams that are coming up, I think you can make an argument for Will Levis to go to, say, Atlanta. I mean, Atlanta, I just don't believe that Desmond Ridder is really going to be their quarterback in all seriousness. I mean, they drafted him in the 3rd. He didn't play well last year. I think that they would like to get another quarterback. Maybe that's trading for Ryan Tannehill or something, but they have to be in the ballpark. The Raiders also, there's a really good case for them, right? I mean, the Raiders get Jimmy Garoppolo and they want to win with Jimmy Garoppolo, but Josh McDaniels also has to be thinking that he wants like his guy. And Jimmy Garoppolo, well, he's been a very good quarterback. He has been a very injured quarterback over the years. You wonder how much San Francisco has played into the success. So, I mean, it's possible that they could take a quarterback, but we start getting after that, though. And I'm going to take a look at the draft order here. After that, Chicago's not taking a quarterback. Philly, I think the only other team that I can look at right now that I would say would be a Will Levis potential team that is around even the top 10 is at 11, and Tennessee, if he doesn't go to either the Raiders or the Falcons. And then you have Washington, maybe Tampa Bay. So there's some teams to get through here if Will Levis is going to end up, dropping. He has to go by a bunch of teams. And I guess I would wonder if he went by enough teams. Is that like a bad sign? With Atlanta, I just don't think that they're in a position where they should really be thinking about tanking, right? They've drafted high the last few years. They actually put together, I think, a decent offensive system last year, but Marcus Mariota, sketchy as he always has been throughout his career. And they had a horrible defense. So that was another thing as well. But, they put together a pretty good offensive system last year, and they have to be looking at that saying we could take another step, right? For Atlanta. So I don't know. I mean, to me, they're in a very good position with some young offensive linemen or good offensive linemen, running game, coach that seems to understand the running game, some receivers that they've drafted. I think that it's probably a good time for Atlanta to draft a quarterback. But if those couple of teams don't, then it gets really interesting to talk about. All right, Arizona is on the clock here, and my brain is already spinning at all the trades, but it seems like that's the norm now. I think intern Haley did the research, and she found that I think it was like 9 trades from last year in the early rounds in the first round. So they're taking Paris Johnson, the tackle from Ohio State, to trade up to take him. I think it's very much Cardinals giveth and taketh away, isn't it? Like their trade back with the Texans, I thought was brilliant. I mean, I think that's a phenomenal trade, but trading up, and they would have more intel than us. They would know better than us where Paris Johnson was expected to be taken. But for him to be picked this high, I don't know about that. Also interesting to bring up, as Aaron does, Jalen Carter not being picked yet. I think that the concerns with Jalen Carter are real, very real, and not just about the off the field stuff. I think teams can forgive the off the field stuff. As we know, we've seen teams forgive a lot of off the field stuff over the years, but would they forgive him showing up at his pro day and struggling and not being able to finish the drills because he was out of shape? Now that I don't know. That was where the red flags to me shot up the pole was. And I remember talking with Chris Trapasso from CBS Sports, regular on the podcast, about I don't think that him having a street racing issue would be a problem, but I do think that the pro day and not being ready would be. But now the door is open for somebody to get an incredible defensive line prospect potentially. We'll see where it goes from here, but the Raiders on the clock, the Cardinals taking a tackle. Man, I don't know. Yes. Carter did say he wasn't visiting any teams that were outside the top 10, but I mean, he might end up outside the top 10. Like that's a thing that's really concerning. If you think that a guy does not take the NFL process seriously, and even that might have sent up some flares for teams like, wait, you're so convinced you're going to do this, you're not even taking other interviews. Like, I don't know. But, here's a team now in the Raiders that could potentially take a quarterback. I don't expect it, but I would put them in the list of teams that potentially could. Let's see. Fingers crossed for a wide receiver as the Vikings pick builds for the future and helps now. Totally agree. If it's a wide receiver, I'm going to give them a lot of credit. And I'm going to think that was the smart way to go. But, you start looking at this and you think like this Will Levis thing is about to get interesting. If he doesn't go here and if he doesn't go to Atlanta, there will be. And what we're seeing too already is the fact that there's no receivers off the board. That makes it interesting for, okay, where is Jackson Smith-Njigba going to go? Because it seems like, and it would be so funny and ironic if the Green Bay decided to finally draft a wide receiver when Aaron Rodgers left. Aaron Rodgers is trolling them. They're trolling him, but they need one. Outside of that, though, there's a lot of talk about how good of prospects are these wide receivers. And I think that there's a lot to like there, but there also has been those rumors throughout the draft process that maybe they would be available late in the first round. So I think that, I agree with Jeremy here that if it's Addison, I think the Vikings have to consider that, even though a trade down probably makes the most sense. So this is kind of where we're at the moment. Vikings still not really in the conversation for trading up. I don't think that even begins if they were until Will Levis would fall to, let me look here at the draft board. I don't know. Would he have to get to like 14 with the New England Patriots for the Vikings if they loved him to start considering, because they just don't have enough draft capital to move up that much. More egregious, Green Bay refusing to give Rodgers receiving help or the Vikings never giving Kirk adequate interior help. And the funny thing about that is Green Bay never tried. They did not. They drafted Christian Watson last year when it was already kind of too late. The Vikings have tried. The Vikings invested, and this is certainly a slam on their approach to the draft. The Vikings invested a first and 2 second-round picks on their interior offensive line, and it was one of the worst interior offensive lines in the NFL last year. I think that also says something about like how you build an offensive line, that with the Paris Johnson pick, I totally get it. Tackle is one of those extremely, extremely important positions. And they're hard to get. You don't just sign a tackle and have it be a star, right? And it's very unlikely that happens for you, that a tackle, the Andrew Whitworth thing happening was a total outlier. It almost never happens. But guards are usually on the free agent market. Centers are usually on the free agent market. And the Vikings spent huge draft capital on centers and guards when you never know if somebody's going to work out or not. And the problem is that you have to play them. If a guard is picked in the second round, you better be playing him. And you have to just hope that he develops on the fly. I think it's kind of bad process to put so many guys that were inexperienced or these high draft picks in and not have some other veterans mixed in with them that were proven. I'm not talking about Tom Compton or Dakota Dozier. So it has been for sure a failure on the interior of the offensive line for the Vikings. And when you look back and talk about regrets, we talk about draft regrets for the Vikings being the corners, but the interior, particularly Ezra Cleveland, I don't think I'll ever understand that one, that Ezra Cleveland was never even considered to be a tackle. And then they draft another tackle. What? I'll never really understand that, because he had elite athleticism. So he should have been able to at least give it a shot, and they never even tried him there. So it was always kind of weird to me. They've spent so much draft capital on the offensive line, and really they've come away with 2 good tackles, which is great, but not enough on the interior. But I do think, to your other point, this is the time for the Green Bay Packers to draft a wide receiver, and that very well could happen. But after that is another team going to invest in a flawed receiver prospect after that ends up happening, and that might open the door for the Vikings to be able to draft a wide receiver at 23. And that would be, in my mind, the only case, unless someone shocking drops. I think we should talk about that. Like, what would you be comfortable with not trading down? And for me, it's wide receiver or Joey Porter Jr. If Joey Porter Jr. drops, I think that you want to take him there because he's more of a top 15 type of prospect, the cornerback out of Penn State, more of a top 15 caliber prospect. So the pick in for the Raiders as we cruise along here in the first round. And what a setup, we had a lot of different options for Purple Insider here of what to do. Going to Kansas City is an option. It's not that far away, something that media is allowed to go cover. And looks pretty cool, to tell you the truth. And also, if you're eating in Kansas City, anybody who's from there, they know it's not a bad trip. But I don't need to gain like 10 pounds in 3 days by going to Kansas City. It looks like an amazing atmosphere, though. And considering the recent weather here, it looks nice outside as well. All right, so Raiders are taking Tyree Wilson. That is a very practical pick for them. Tall, lanky, kind of freak athlete. Might be a guy who can move around a little like Zadarius Smith. A great dresser also, it seems. That is a look. I actually considered that for tonight, but I just went with a regular polo shirt. But Tyree Wilson was pushed a lot by the draft community because of his raw skills and maybe even over Will Anderson. But I think what we saw play out here is that he's not considered quite to that level of Will Anderson, but that's a good pick for them. They have been so bad on defense lately. And you say this as, the Vikings kind of have a similar look, so bad on defense over the last few years. This was a guy that they needed to pick if they weren't going to be a believer in a future quarterback. But also now this starts to get interesting. Like, is the league not buying into Will Levis? Because if Arizona doesn't take him, I'm sorry, not Arizona, Atlanta. If Atlanta does not take Will Levis, then we're looking at the board going, okay, well, who is going to take him? Is it going to be Tennessee? Because it's not going to be Chicago. It's not going to be Philadelphia. Is it going to be Tennessee? Is it going to be not Green Bay. New England. Now that would be a shock if they really hate Mac Jones. Is it going to be Washington? Is it going to be, what about Detroit trying to get their future quarterback? Maybe. So I don't know. There's a lot of interesting potential scenarios here. Tampa Bay also as a team that could potentially go for Will Levis as well. But man, an interesting situation to see him start slowly moving down this draft board. I'm catching up, sorry, on your responses here in the comments section. If Will Levis gets past the Titans, it's officially on. Nick, I agree with you. Yeah, it officially becomes a conversation, I think, if he gets past the Titans, because then where do we start to call it a free fall? I think at Washington, if he goes by Washington, then it's then it's a free fall. So we're only a few picks away from that conversation starting to happen. Continue with the comments. Great stuff. You guys all night long. I really appreciate it. We're going to get Will Ragatz here from SI.com shortly. I'm going to send him a quick message. Let's see if Atlanta picks Bijan Robinson, then the Cook trade rumors are gone. I think Atlanta should be fine with running back, right? They drafted somebody last year. They had a really good running game. I think that they should be okay. But the Bijan Robinson conversation, every draft analyst wanted to say, this guy's the best prospect in the whole draft. Someone needs to take him super high. You guys are absolutely crazy for questioning whether you should take a running back. And we'll see. Right around now is where kind of we'll see how that plays out if the league is not valuing Bijan Robinson as much as the mock draft folks, because Atlanta was mocked to him pretty consistently. I never quite got that one, but they are a team that is run by a dude who had Derrick Henry. That might influence them, that they went pretty far and were a successful offense around Derrick Henry. All right. Texting Will Ragatz now to get his reaction to what we have gotten so far in the NFL draft. Again, thank you all for logging on to this tonight. A lot of you here in the room. Really appreciate that. I knew that this would be fun. I thought about going out to TCO Performance Center tonight. But for one, I thought, well, they might just not even pick somebody. And then That's not any fun. I don't know if they had tacos out there or not. That might have swung the difference, but I wanted to spend it here with you guys and try to have as much fun as we can going down this process of the NFL draft. So thank you so much for everybody joining. Jonathan is behind the scenes producing. So the scroll you see, he is our breaking news analyst. Basically, whatever Adam Schefter says, Jonathan tells us because he can watch the TV with the sound on. From Miles, how many of the quarterbacks that have fallen have gone on to be successful? We obviously know about Rodgers, Lamar, Teddy. Who else? Yeah, it depends on, like, falling into the late first round is a different conversation than falling into the second round. Falling into the second round probably has a lot less success. But I'll look this up since we've got time now. Let's see. I mean, the first one that comes to mind for me is, well, Jordan Love. I don't know if it was a fall or he was kind of projected to go there, but I'm just looking at late first round quarterbacks. Jordan Love was definitely one. Drew Lock fell into the second round. Lamar Jackson, as you mentioned. Let's see. Paxton Lynch. There was a lot of hype for Paxton Lynch, which tells you how random this whole thing can be sometimes. Derek Carr was a guy that I don't know if fell is the right word. Oh, Johnny Manziel. Johnny Manziel was probably a big one. Brady Quinn is a great one. Scott, thank you for that. Brady Quinn. How about Jimmy Clausen? I think that Jimmy Clausen was also probably one that people talked about. I remember Mel Kiper and was very, very high on Jimmy Clausen. And, he ended up going in the second round. What do the writers do while they wait at TCO? The same thing we're doing right now. That's why I decided to do it for content. I mean, usually it's just a lot of discussion about what's going to happen. And again, food for sure, if that's out there. But a lot of it is just waiting. And just waiting to see what happens, because you can't really write anything until you know what's going to happen. So it's just a lot of chatter about what's going on with each draft pick, what it means, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's just a big old waiting game. That's one thing I would tell people. Like, sometimes people ask about the job of reporting on an NFL team. And a lot of times I talk about how, like, there's a lot of waiting for press conferences, waiting for draft picks, waiting for stuff to happen. What do you got, Jonathan?
The Atlanta pick is in. They are making that pick. I'm not going to announce it here because it's coming up on the TV in a second. But after them, it's supposed to be Chicago. They have traded out. The Eagles have traded up.
Okay. Wow. All right. That means the Eagles absolutely love somebody for trading up with Chicago. Also, good move for Chicago dropping back. So let's, I'm going to announce the pick here in a second, and then Will Ragatz from SI.com is going to jump on right after we get the pick. Or do we have a whole concert? This is crazy, this event. At some point we're going to go. At some point, Jonathan, we're going to go to one of these. Maybe we should have gone to Vegas. I don't know. But we're going to go at some point, because this looks like an absolute party.
Oh yeah, this one in particular, with the amount of fans there, that it's simply incredible what Kansas City has done.
I mean, I'm just in the house. Will is at TCO Performance Center. You're in your basement or something. So, all right, we're waiting for the pick here to come in, and then we'll get to Will and get his breakdown of what's going on. But I think the NFC North so far with these trade downs has been very savvy. Let's see. They are taking, come on, television. Show us who it's going to be. Did they say it already?
Yeah, they did. It's Bijan Robinson.
Wow. Okay. Yep. Wow. Okay. Bijan Robinson, a running back in the top 10. Not smart, Falcons. They already had a great running game last year. Will Ragatz, what is up, man? SI.com out there at TCO Performance Center. I mean, you are rocking the beard. It looks like you've crafted it here for this evening. What is going on, my friend?
I'm doing good. I am just out here waiting patiently for the Vikings pick to come, and it's going to be a while because this thing moves really slowly, but it's exciting. It's cool after many months to see these picks come in and see the trades that there's already been a few of those. Some excitement. Nothing too crazy, I would say, so far, but yeah, it's I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I feel like this was mockable for some people. I know Daniel Jeremiah called that trade of the Texans moving up, but I don't think there's been anything that's been a true shock where we've gone, wait a minute, that guy in the first or something. I will say though, I was never really buying Bijan Robinson to the Atlanta Falcons, and they've just done that. And I feel like as much as Bijan Robinson is a great, phenomenal prospect, I mean, they just did the NFC a favor. I mean, I don't know. Like they have Desmond Ridder as their quarterback. They had a great running game last year, and apparently they're not going to use it. They don't throw the ball to Kyle Pitts. They may have drafted a much worse wide receiver than Chris Olave in their own division last year. That is just an unserious franchise right now, and I think drafting a running back in this position probably adds to that.
Yeah, I mean, they've had a top 8 pick 3 years in a row. And you go Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and now Bijan Robinson. Like, that's just not a very inspiring haul with a number 4 pick and 2 number 8 picks. Like, I get that, like you said, Bijan Robinson is awesome, but drafting a running back in the top 10 in the year of our Lord 2023, I don't know if I get it. I think they could have had Jalen Carter there. They could have had Christian Gonzalez. They could have had a bunch of different players there. I don't necessarily hate it, but just kind of the whole sum of what they've done the last few years is a little weird. A tight end and a running back, and Drake London doesn't look like he's going to be anything special. It's only been a year, but yeah, not great there. I do think you pointed out the Texans moving up to 3 is probably the biggest surprise. Just had 2 picks in the top 3 like that. They gave up a ton to do that. I think it was great for Arizona to move back, and then they end up coming up again. But they got a bunch out of that deal with the Texans. So yeah, we'll see what's coming up here. And then the Eagles to just now go up 1 spot with the Bears is interesting to me. But I don't know. We're waiting to announce picks here. We're not spoiling anything. Is that how you're doing
it? I'm waiting until I see it come up on the TV, which has caused me to be like, oh, come on, say it, TV.
Yeah.
But to your point, the trades are kind of the story here. And with Arizona, I thought their first trade was brilliant. Like, wow, they just got everything they wanted in Houston. And I know it's hard not to connect that to what Kwesi did last year and think, okay, wow, that's usually what you get when you make a huge trade like that. Not what Kwesi got, but different situation. I understand. But then Arizona moves up to take a tackle that they may have been able to take anyway. That's probably the weirdest is like Arizona. Wow, they're smart now. Oh wait, no, they're not. Like I thought that was crazy and a huge win, I think, for the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, I like that for the Lions as well. I mean, I think oftentimes, unless it's for a QB, I'm just going to like the side of the team that's trading down because I think the value is just better there. I think teams talk themselves into these players like, oh, we got to go get Paris Johnson to protect Kyler Murray. You could have a really good tackle and just stay put at 12. I don't know if Johnson gets all the way there, but there's other tackles in this draft who are first round quality. So I think of all the deals so far, I've liked the teams moving down more than I've liked the teams coming out. I don't know about the 1 pick with Philly Chicago thing. That's a little different because it's just I think they gave up like a 4th or something to get a good player whose name I will not say because it's not it hasn't been announced yet. But I've liked the moves down so far, and I'm just curious to see now, like with the quarterbacks, where does Will Levis go? Because he's sliding now, and I don't think there's an obvious spot until maybe late in the teens with like the Lions or Buccaneers maybe, or will he be there when the Vikings are up at 23? I think that's not insane to say at this point.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, like, who are the potential teams that could take Will Levis? And I can't find a ton of them, but there are a few. I mean, number one that would be absolutely crazy is if the Patriots just went completely rogue and said, we hate you, Mac Jones. Screw you. We are drafting another quarterback. I can't really see that happening. I think they have to try to work it out with Mac Jones. But after that, I mean, you have really Washington and Tampa Bay. To me, are the 2 teams that are the most likely, because you have Sam Howell that nobody knows if Sam Howell's going to be good or not. And he was a 5th round draft pick. That's really aggressive for a team that does have actually a good defense and some weapons to not have really any answer at quarterback. And then with Tampa Bay, you lose Tom Brady, you bring in Baker Mayfield. That's not an answer. Baker Mayfield is a filler. He is not a franchise quarterback, more likely than not. But if those two teams have not liked what they saw with Will Levis, then we are talking about the potential. I think right now it's starting to get a little hot in here when it comes to the potential for Will Levis. Do you think that's a good idea, Will?
I do not necessarily know the answer to how I feel about that. I mean, I wonder if the Vikings like Will Levis. I wonder if he is what Kevin O'Connell looks for in a quarterback, because I think there are some concerns there based on how he looked last year. And I know that there were circumstances where he had a bad offensive line and he had lost Liam Cohen, the really sharp offensive coach who helped him have a great 2021 season. But I think there's some stuff there with accuracy and mechanics, with decision-making, processing, things, just kind of very important quarterback things. And this was also part of the Anthony Richardson conversation. But I don't know how Kevin O'Connell's going to feel about him. If both Will Levis and Hendon Hooker are there at 23, I mean, you'd think Will Levis would be ahead, but it wouldn't be necessarily shocking to see Hooker actually go ahead of Levis, because I think some of the concerns are just different there. The concerns with Hooker are more age, the ACL, kind of the offense that he played in at Tennessee. But man, this is going to be really interesting. I think the first team where you could maybe see Levis would be coming up soon. The Titans at 11 have been talked about as a potential quarterback spot, but I thought of them more as like maybe they trade up for Stroud. You never know how a certain team and their front office is going to feel about a certain player. It's not just, oh, here's everybody's draft boards and the consensus boards and all these things, and these teams are just going to follow that. Like, every team has their own board. Every team likes certain players and every team doesn't like certain players. Like, we just don't know very much, which is what makes this really exciting. So we'll see. I mean, it'll be fascinating if Levis continues to fall. I wonder when we're going to see Jackson Smith and Jigba and some of the receivers start to potentially go, because that's something for the Vikings. We've had just the one cornerback so far. Christian Gonzalez will probably be going sometime pretty soon, I would think. But will, like, Joey Porter Jr. make it to the Vikings? Will Brian Branch, Deonte Banks, all these guys. Since I'm here at TCO Performance Center and I drove the 25 minutes from my house to get here, I'm fully expecting Kwesi to just trade out of the first round entirely, so I don't have any pick to write about tonight, because it would just be the most on-brand thing ever. But we'll see when we get there, and we'll see who's on the board.
And they could even just move down and stay in the first and keep us broadcasting longer here. Maybe we'll need a multiple check-in situation from you out there, since I know what you guys are doing. You're just sitting there watching like everyone else. That was
yeah. I got the Twins game on my laptop and just looking at the draft feed and checking my Twitter every 2 seconds. But yeah, we can check again later for sure.
By the way, it is Jalen Carter. If everybody didn't get that, the Jalen Carter was Philadelphia's pick. So clearly they felt they needed to trade up. Fascinating that the Philadelphia Eagles, them and the San Francisco 49ers, they just say, like, give me more offensive linemen, or defensive and offensive, but especially defensive linemen. Just give me more. Like, that's all I want is defensive linemen in the draft, and then we'll get everything else. But you make a great point about both wide receivers and corners, that there was discussion about multiple high corner picks, and those could be coming on the way pretty soon. Christian Gonzalez especially is a guy that's been mocked very high. But as we kind of go along here and we look at the potential players for the Vikings at 23, I think that the longer we go without some of those corners being taken, that it becomes more likely that they would stay at 23. And when I was talking to Andrew Krammer earlier, he said that he felt like if they stayed at 23 and just picked a player, that it's hard to give them an A for tonight. I think that if it's a corner who's a great prospect that drops, or a wide receiver, we could still give them an A for this pick tonight, if that's the way that they ultimately end up going.
Yeah, I think you could. We'll wait and see who it ends up being. I think it's going to be really tempting for Kwesi to trade down because of the value and the only having 5 picks thing. I thought maybe there was a chance they would trade up, and I was getting all on the Anthony Richardson train, and then he goes at 4 to the Colts, which I think is an awesome fit with the Shane Steichen offense and what he was able to do with Jalen Hurts last year. The Eagles, I mean, that's a potentially terrifying pick. Jalen Carter has been talked about by some as potentially just the best player in this draft, talent-wise. There was some off-the-field stuff with him. But, yeah, I mean, 2 years in a row now where there is a stud, just freak athlete defensive tackle coming out of Georgia, and the Eagles got both of them. They got Jordan Davis. They got Jalen Carter. They got Nakobe Dean, the Georgia linebacker, in there as well. They're just making their defense out of Georgia players, which seems like a good idea after what that team's done the last few years. So that is, I mean, this is an Eagles team that was just in the Super Bowl, and now they get maybe one of the top players in the draft at number 9. That's still a little concerning, I would say, for the rest of the NFC. And I guess the Bears didn't want Jalen Carter, so they were cool with moving back one spot to pick up a 4th. I don't really know. That moving up 1 pick thing is interesting to me. Maybe Philly has thought that somebody else would jump them for Jalen Carter. It has to be something like that. But yeah, that's I think that has a chance to be a really good pick.
I mean, Ryan Poles has kind of been all over the map a little bit. I'm going to throw up a comment here from our friend Scott about how Detroit and Chicago have a clear vision of what they're executing. The Vikings are flying by the seat of their pants, and I've yet to see many things that inspire confidence. And it's also hard for either of us, I think, to disagree with that comment. I mean, these are 2 teams in Detroit and Chicago that seem to know exactly what they want. I mean, they want more draft capital and they want to rebuild in the most rebuildy ways possible. The only questionable thing from Ryan Poles is trading for Chase Claypool. The jury is out on that though, because he does have history of being pretty good, but that is so noticeable is, you know what it's like? If you've ever seen the meme of I think it's Dwight Schrute, looking at everybody in the parking lot. I feel like that's us with Detroit and Chicago, where it's just oh, you guys are doing trades and drafting players and doing all this stuff, huh? We're kind of just waiting around and eating. What do you guys got out there? Tacos? Darnell Wright, they're going with, by the way. What do you got for food?
We got the some Chinese food, actually, which I don't know that I've ever seen at TCO Performance Center.
A draft night twist.
Not terrible. It is a draft night twist. I was expecting pizza or something simple, but yeah, not bad. Okay. But yeah, it's weird. I mean, I think it's a fair point that the Lions and Bears maybe seem like they have a more defined strategy, but I also think right now, they've made picks already. That's because they were really bad last year, and they have higher draft picks than the Vikings, who won more games last. We'll see. Let's give the Vikings a little bit benefit of the doubt, which I know is a little bit hard to do after kind of a weird first round last year in the first Kwesi draft and the whole moving from 12 to 32 thing. And I mean, Lewis Cine getting hurt was unpredictable and unfortunate, but let's see. I think I've been saying for a while, I think we're going to learn a lot about the Vikings with what they do here. And I still think that's true. So I'm just fascinated to see who's on the board at 23 and if they decide to pull the trigger on one of those players or if they end up moving down.
Yeah, Darnell Wright going to Chicago. Very predictable that they would go offensive line. Not Skoronski, though. So your Northwestern guy will have to wait. Courtney Cronin was on the show the other day. She was she'll be very disappointed. She wanted Skoronski because it sounds like a Midwest guy,
And he's from the Chicagoland area too. So interesting that they did not hit. He's a really, really good player. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Northwestern fan, but it's just the thing with some of the tackles where you got the short arms, you got the T-Rex arms, and you're oh, we got to put them at guard. And then the positional value is a little different. So whoever does take, I don't think Skoronski will be waiting too much longer here, but I'm curious whoever does take him, if they at least try him at tackle first, or if they straight up Ezra Cleveland him and just immediately move him to guard.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's very possible. And we were talking about that earlier, just on the Ezra Cleveland bit, and how, it is risky if you're going to invest in things like guards, or as Atlanta did with a running back, because if that guy doesn't become a great player, then you really feel like you wasted a pick if he can't become a franchise tackle. So they must believe that Darnell Wright has the potential to become a franchise tackle. But just kind of back to that NFC North conversation, the Green Bay Packers are coming up here. I would be totally shocked if they don't pick Jackson Smith-Njigba. And maybe that's just something they don't believe in, is drafting a wide receiver high in the first round. But I think they have to do that. I just think that
it would be really funny if they take JSN and finally take a first-round wide receiver after all those years of not doing it for Rodgers, and then he's gone. And they're like, oh, Jordan Love, all right, you can have a first-round wide receiver. I think that would be perhaps a little concerning for Vikings fans because that dude is really good.
Yeah, well, and also pairing him with Christian Watson. I mean, that would be a good situation for Jordan Love, at least maybe a year down the road. I mean, who knows how it goes in the first season. And Smith-Njigba was banged up last year, so he didn't play a lot. But I think that is a pick that's kind of been locked in by a lot of people for some time, especially after the trade for them to move up a little. Might have been one of the reasons for them to move up a little, was to be able to make sure that they're able to get the top receiver in the draft. And Smith-Njigba, by most analysts, has been talked about as kind of far above the next best wide receiver prospect. So there's kind of that to consider for them as well. So I'm looking at this now, thinking about, like, if it's not Will Levis right here, then he could end up dropping quite a ways. And things get very interesting with this draft board. The tackles going high kind of opens the door, because that's not a Vikings position for somebody interesting being on the board for them, if even Skoronski goes here in the top. But just to stick with the, Detroit, their approach of trading down again, after last year trading up, but this time trading down. And they also have a Viking second round pick from TJ Hawkinson. I mean, this team, I think that, clearly Brad Holmes and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah have a relationship because they've pulled off these trades, but that is a team I think to look at and just copy in the future. And I'm not saying Detroit, because it is Detroit, you never know, but by logic, by analytics, by like the way that we have sort of made this a science of dealing in draft capital, Brad Holmes has absolutely nailed it. And I think that, going back to what Scott said, it really sort of shines here in this draft night, just how much these two teams, Chicago and Detroit, have just stacked up this draft capital and the benefit that they get from it. Again, nothing is a guarantee, but man, you're putting your odds on these teams getting multiple high draft pick players to be able to build around.
Yeah, I think I saw a tweet for Detroit. It's like they have 5 picks in the top 60 or something like that now, which is you're going to get a lot of impact players. I think that into the second round, into the third round, you can find these really, really kind of strong prospects. And then once you get into day 3, you're kind of more just taking dart throws at guys with interesting traits or things like that. But I like what Detroit's done. I'm really curious to see who they end up taking here at 12 in a bit. But I think they're loaded. I think the people talk about the Bears with the cap space and all the draft capital they have. And I don't know too much about Darnell Wright. I think it's probably smart for them to take a tackle to protect Justin Fields. I never really dove into the tackles too much because that's the one with the Vikings where you're like, there's no way. That's basically the only position that may be running back where you're like, they're just not doing that in the first round. But I'm in agreement. I think both of those teams are stacked up well. It's just always obviously going to come down to, for Chicago, is Justin Fields the guy? Is he going to become a stud? And then with the Lions, are they content here with Jared Goff? Is there any chance they would take Will Levis? I haven't heard any kind of buzz about that possibility, but it'll be really interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, I just get the feeling, and this could blow up so quickly in my face, but I just get the feeling that Detroit believes in Jared Goff, which it's not like Jared Goff's never had success before. He's got 3 top 5 offenses under his belt and a trip to the Super Bowl before. So, I mean, it's not like Goff can't play, but it doesn't seem like that's ever really been a conversation about them drafting a potential quarterback. So we'll get through this pick with the Titans, see what they do here, and then kind of I'll let you go, and maybe we can do a check-in later depending on how things go. But before you go, what do you think? Like, how do you think this plays out? I mean, has your mind changed? I assume that you had a trade down as being the favorite. Has your mind changed at all on where the Vikings go after what you've seen so far?
No, I don't think it has really. I don't think there's been much so far that has kind of directly impacted the Vikings, other than obviously Anthony Richardson not sliding at all. I'm sort of leaning that Will Levis is not going to be the Vikings guy. I don't know that. That's just kind of a feel that I have, or a gut feeling. So I don't necessarily think it'll be him. It wouldn't shock me. It wouldn't shock me if it's Hendon Hooker. The one that, I mean, just me personally, like what I would do if I were the Vikings, or what I think would be the most fun, would be taking like Jordan Addison, because I think he just kind of uniquely would fit really, really well in an offense with Justin Jefferson, with TJ Hawkinson, where he would see a ton of single coverage. I think he's not the athletic specimen that like a Quentin Johnston is. He's not a speed demon that like Jalen Hyatt is, but he's just got that really refined game, the route running, the hands. I mean, people maybe forget a little bit because he was at USC last year and was a little bit slowed by injuries, but he had 1,600 yards at Pitt the year before that and was the top receiver in the nation. So I think that would be, just personally for me, the most fun. I think this is a passing league. This is a weapons league. So I think adding another weapon there makes a lot of sense. I think you can find cornerbacks who are going to be serviceable. I mean, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but I would lean wide receiver over cornerback. That all depends on who's there, though. So, no, I don't think my mind has changed too much on what the Vikings are going to do. I would also totally get it if they took a cornerback there. So we shall see. And this Lions pick has been leaked by some people and is fascinating. So we'll wait for that to come out. But yeah, just look forward to that when that gets announced. I'll say that.
I have seen it, but
I don't know if you've seen it. Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil, and I would just, people.
I like that you're respecting the fans and their viewing experience here, and not spoiling.
And people in the comments, kind of do the same thing. Just because I want people to match up the broadcast with us to hear the Vikings spin on everything and the Vikings discussion, but also not have it ruined. So anyway, we'll see what the Lions do here, and I'll be excited to talk about that. Skoronski goes to the Titans, though, which means no Will Levis, which means another kind of hurdle here of a team that could have potentially taken him. I'm just starting to get I'm starting to get Drew Lock vibes from Will Levis, of this, like, his stats aren't that good, but man, he's got this big arm and everybody likes him, but he eats mayo with his coffee and just like all these kind of things.
It's bananas with the peel on and stuff.
Yeah, it just feels like that's the case. Okay, so the Lions selection is in, and so since it's the Lions, we'll get your reaction, and then so Jahmyr Gibbs.
That, yeah.
Jahmyr Gibbs, wow, a versatile running back / receiver,
2 running backs in the top 12.
Wow. So just when we thought that the analytics had taken over, but I mean, playmakers, right? Like, they're looking for playmakers to put around their quarterback, and Jahmyr Gibbs, I think, is more than just a running back, right?
Yeah, Bijan Robinson is like special, possibly generational type of just pure runner. Jahmyr Gibbs is like the Alvin Kamara type guy, where he could catch 60 passes, 70 passes in a season because the skill set, he's got good hands, he's really, really shifty and explosive. He's a great player. I'm just at 12. I mean, I guess when you're the Lions and you have all of these picks, you can do this, but would Jahmyr Gibbs not have been there? What's their next pick? Like 18? Would he not have been there at 18 to the point where you have to take him at 12 over like Christian Gonzalez, for example? That is the first, I think, real like stunner to me in this draft. And 2 running backs in 2023, and there hasn't been a wide receiver taken yet. Like, I mean, maybe this is fun. I love the draft for stuff like this. There's always stuff that you never see coming, and he's a really good player. I think he's going to be great for that offense, but it's a question of value to me.
He's also like not that big either. So is he, do they think he's like Barry Sanders or something? I don't know. Yeah. I mean, look, to me, it's a horrendous pick, considering that Christian Gonzalez is still on the board. Joey Porter Jr. is still on the board. And they're showing the Lions draft room, and they're like throwing things and slamming they must really love Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, look, they showed he can play in the slot and he can be a wide receiver option, but we've also kind of like sold ourselves on that before. I mean, look, if he's Christian McCaffrey, that's going to be a lot for the Vikings to deal with. It's just that the value of this is kind of crazy. I mean, you know what, though? I guess I would say, Will, when they have as much draft capital as they have, they can blow a pick on something like this and have it not really hurt them.
Yeah, you can. That doesn't mean you should. Like,
no.
That doesn't, we have 5 top 50 picks. That doesn't mean you should go and use one on a running back, the 12th overall pick. I mean, it could turn out where he is one of the top running backs in the league. And like, I think that's the thing we saw with the 49ers trading for McCaffrey, is that in the modern game, the question of running back value is clouded a little bit when you talk about adding the receiving element, and they can be a big part of the passing game and be a big like guy who's good in pass protection and catch a bunch of balls and be more than just, getting you 5 yards on 1st and 10 or up here running. Like, I think that's part of it, but I agree with you. I do not like that pick for the Lions. I think Vikings fans, just NFC North fans of any other NFC North team, should be encouraged by that, because there was the comment from a fan earlier that the Lions look like they know what they're doing. I'm not so sure of that anymore.
So it's kind of like, a little bit of both sides, because when they make that draft pick and the value is so bad for a running back, and taking him there is just something that, it's brought up by David in the comments here, that Krammer was a 3rd round pick. Also, go look down the board at guys who are available probably in this draft in the 3rd and 4th. You're going to find all sorts of interesting playmaking type of players. This is a great running back draft that's very deep and could produce a bunch of good players.
Day 2, day 3, there's a bunch of interesting guys. Yeah.
Right. So there's that, but there's also but he's going to play the games, and he's going to play them against the Vikings. And, so I think for Vikings fans, you do have to be, when you start looking at this, Amon-Ra St. Brown, when Jameson Williams comes back from the gambling thing, and then you add Gibbs to the mix, they've got weapons and an offensive line that's really good for Detroit. So both, it could be a bad pick by value and a good pick by if the guy produces. It could be really something. So, if you're not busy, we can wait till the Packers pick, since we're just running through.
I'll stick around for the Packers. Yeah. My worry is the Vikings coming out of nowhere and trading up for presumably Levis. I don't think they would trade up for any other position. I mean, maybe if Christian Gonzalez keeps falling further and they really have him stacked way ahead of the other cornerbacks, that could be something. But with only 5 picks, you're really not in a position to be moving up unless you think this quarterback is an absolute stud. And I think if they thought that about Will Levis, they might have already made that move. So I don't know for sure. They could be waiting and assuming that he's going to make it to a certain spot where the price will be lower. But I don't necessarily see that happening. I think it looks like they're going to be picking at 23 or moving down. But yeah, well, I'm still kind of in shock from this Lions pick, but we'll see what the Packers do here as well.
I mean, I suppose if they see him as somebody who can be a wide receiver as well, but we've heard that so many times, and they've even said that about Bijan Robinson. I just don't buy it. It just doesn't happen in the NFL where someone becomes an actual threat. And Christian McCaffrey is really the only guy in the league who really does that. And even he doesn't go down the field. He is like line up in the slot, throw a bubble screen or something. That's probably going to be the case. So we've got the Packers coming up here.
The Lions didn't need a running back. They took DeAndre Swift fairly high.
Yep.
Early 2nd round a couple of years ago?
The other thing too is it's always this guy is different, right? It's always like, no, you don't understand. This guy's different. This guy's different. And yet we see all the time the Aaron Joneses, the Alvin Kamara's coming from, out of nowhere to become great players. So the Packers are announcing the pick right now, and we will see what they decide to do. Lucas Van Ness, the pass rusher. Yep. So they pass on Jackson Smith-Njigba. And if you're Aaron Rodgers, you're like texting Jordan Love. They did it to you too. I can't believe it. They did it to you too.
What they do.
Lucas Van Ness, though, kind of a freak. Kind of a freak pass rusher, physically dominant production at Iowa, and somebody that paired with Rashawn Gary. I mean, that could be pretty scary for the Vikings as far as defensive line goes for the future with him.
Yeah, the Packers have shown for a long time that they want to have the pass rush production on the edge. They had the Smiths. They had Rashawn Gary, who's developed into a great player. They had Lucas Van Ness, who is a little bit like technically raw, but just super powerful, great motor. I think he has a chance to be a really, really good player. So, yeah, those will be some fun battle. I mean, I think the Vikings are positioned pretty well to handle that with having Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill. But, still, it's an interesting pick for the Packers. I think Van Ness was always going to be a first-round guy, probably a top half of the first-round guy. But, yeah, Jackson Smith-Njigba is sitting right there, and they don't do it. It's interesting.
What do you got, Jonathan?
The Steelers have traded up with the Patriots. So everybody knew that the Patriots might trade down because they have a history of doing that. They have done that. The Steelers are now on the clock.
Oh, interesting. Will, do you know Jonathan? That's Jonathan.
Hey, Will.
Hey, Jonathan. I don't know if we've ever officially met, but this is what is this, like 3-4 trades or something already in the top 14? It's fun.
Yeah,
Patriots
for sure.
traded.
I was not aware that Jonathan could be a little box in between us, but that's a nice little feature. I like that. So, all right, we'll see what happens here with the Steelers. Maybe Jackson Smith-Njigba here, maybe a corner. I mean, Christian Gonzalez dropping. We will see. But Will, thanks so much for taking the time, man. Coming in, dropping in midway through the draft. We'll see if we check in with you again. Yeah. If not, we will be back podcasting, breaking this all down again later on this week, getting your reaction as well. So thanks so much for all your contributions, by the way, to the podcast leading up to the draft. Always appreciate you. And thanks for doing this, man. Enjoy the rest of the night.
Yeah, you too. Have a good rest of the show. Maybe I'll see you later.
All right. Sounds good. Will Ragatz, SI.com. Will is a regular on the show, on the Purple Insider podcast. If you're just discovering us, it seems like from the list of people commenting, most of you already listen to the podcast and you know Will, but if you don't, then check it out. He's coming on every week. And I mean, great question from Jason here. Is there a reason Christian Gonzalez has not been taken yet? And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, because he was considered to be a top 10 type of prospect. And it seems like just kind of the way the board is falling. But the more players that go by that there is not a cornerback taken, the more possibility it is for the Vikings to potentially end up with a really good cornerback prospect. And as we're talking about, how would we give the Vikings a good grade? If Joey Porter Jr. or Christian Gonzalez got to number 23 and they picked him, who would be against that? I mean, those both are talked about as potential top 15 picks. So the Patriots end up moving back just a little bit here. We'll see what they decide to do. They should be looking for Jackson Smith-Njigba, I think, but I also feel like they don't draft wide receivers all that often. So if we go back and just talk a little bit about how things have gone here tonight. I mean, the winners of the first half of the draft. I mean, for me, I was about to say, Arizona, but then it became not so much with them trading up to get a tackle. I think the Houston Texans, a gigantic winner to be able to get two potential star players to build their franchise around. I would have said Detroit, but this Jahmyr Gibbs pick is so interesting. I'm going to take a look kind of at some of the numbers and, what makes Jahmyr Gibbs stand out so much here. I'm just going to pull it up. He was expected, by the way, in terms of average draft position, to be in the back end of the first round. He was not expected to be anywhere near the first round like this. So last year, the Alvin Kamara thing does make a lot of sense looking at his numbers. Last year, he ran for 926 yards, 6 yards a carry, 44 catches for 444 yards receiving. There's nothing about that that's absolutely wild, I think, that would make him the type of pick that you would, I don't know, like throw a table over, as it seems like Brad Holmes did. And again, I mean, this is what the draft can do to you, right? We were just talking about, wow, I mean, Brad Holmes is nailing this draft and really laying out the course for all other GMs. And then they decide to go get Gibbs. And it just feels like a massive, massive reach. but they'll draft again very soon since, they've traded back and handled their draft capital well. So, I guess I'm inclined to think that both Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs could be very impressive players, but where they're taken, this goes totally against what teams have done in the recent past. And even, I was talking about this with somebody recently about running backs, and I'll admit I was not totally buying the idea that Bijan Robinson would even go this high. And I think I said it early in the broadcast, just because teams have shied so much away from those running backs. So to see two teams going for it now, pretty wild. The Steelers traded up for Broderick Jones, the tackle out of Georgia, a very large fella. I walked by him at the combine and I had to stop. I mean, you don't want to be rude, but that is a large gentleman. So a good pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They get pass protection for Kenny Pickett, who they picked last year. Not in any means exciting. So here comes the Jets. And I think the Jets, might consider a wide receiver here, Jackson Smith-Njigba. I think that there's a lot of teams that Smith-Njigba has to get through in order to be on the board for the Vikings. But the other wide receivers, this is good if you want another wide receiver, for none to have been taken so far in this draft for the Vikings. So how's everybody feeling? Let's do kind of a check-in in the comment section. Are you nervous about Will Levis still being on the board? Are you confident that the Vikings will stay at 23? Are you getting anxious or excited? What's the feelings, everybody? Jump in the comment section and let me know. A lot of you watching here tonight. Again, just let me pause and say thanks so much, everybody, for taking the time to choose us when you have so many different options. Jonathan Harrison, can't thank him enough for putting this all together, and the production and our breaking news. We should have called them the breaking news desk. I think we missed an opportunity there from the very beginning, but it's a very interesting night as always. And I think everything remains on the board potentially for the Minnesota Vikings at this point. I agree with Aaron here. A ton of good players could be available at 23rd overall. It's not just good players, but players that the Vikings could want. I mean, because when you think about this board so far, Jalen Carter was never really in play. You've got 4 tackles, 3 quarterbacks. These are not positions aside from quarterback, but they were never getting, Anthony Richardson. These are not positions that the Vikings really need. It's really corner, wide receiver, maybe edge rusher, and, quarterback if that's a thing. But these are positions that are going off the board. Running back, not a position that the Vikings should have ever been considering. That is a favorable way of the board falling for the Vikings. Adam says Porter Jr. Yeah. Porter Jr. seems like the perfect type of Brian Flores cornerback. Super lanky, athletic, press type of corner. That would be a great fit for them. From Matt, congratulations to Lucas Van Ness and your Hawkeye fandom that he went high there. But unfortunately, if you're on a Viking stream, now you have to, what are you going to do? Are you going to cheer for Van Ness against the Vikings? Life's complicated for you. Stay at 23, take a wide receiver or defensive end, defensive tackle. Hey, that's a reminder that Kalijah Kancey has not been taken yet. And there's a lot of buzz for Kalijah Kancey leading up to this thing. And, we haven't seen him taken off the board as the Aaron Donald prototype. Miles, nervous, of course. Vikings fans are always nervous. Steve, happy with what's available. Steve, I've forgiven you for criticizing my Taco Bell order earlier. So I'll take that comment. But I agree that you should be happy for what's available right now on the board, except if you don't want them to pick Will Levis. Then you're nervous, I think. Clark, and that's exactly what is happening with Clark. Afraid that they will take Will Levis or Hendon Hooker. Let's talk about it for a second, because now we are in the range of talk about it with Will Levis. I think we got to start discussing it. If Kevin O'Connell watches Will Levis and says, I'm doing it. I love him. I think he's a beast. I think he's got a great arm. He can make all those throws that Kirk can't. If that's what he's not going to say that publicly, But if that's his belief, it would be very hard for me to say what a huge mistake, because I'm a little concerned about his accuracy. I'm a little concerned about the hits that he took last year. But if Kevin O'Connell, former NFL quarterback, offensive coordinator for Matthew Stafford, Super Bowl winner of 13 games with Kirk Cousins, top 10 offense, that Kevin O'Connell really wants Will Levis, I just have a tough time saying, nah. Like, I think I would, look, I know that the football people get things wrong. We were just criticizing the heck out of teams drafting running backs. But in this situation, I would have to say, if you believe it, then you do it. That's how I would say it. But I don't know that they will. I think there's too many flaws there that they will. From Cameron, nice to see you, Cameron. With cornerbacks and wide receivers falling, a trade back is even more anticlimactic. Yeah, I mean, depending on how far the trade back is, then yeah, I mean, if you're talking about trading back like 5 spots and taking a receiver, I actually think that taking a receiver a little farther back is not a bad idea. Let's say Zay Flowers off the board, Smith-Njigba, something like that, then you're still getting a Jordan Addison. You're still getting a Quentin Johnson. I don't think that's a bad idea. I do think, though, that with the corners, there's a cliff. And I think that cliff is Emmanuel Forbes. If it gets to, because I think Tyreek Stevenson is another level down. So if you get to Emmanuel Forbes and you get to Deonte Banks, that's where you got to pick one of them, I think, if you're talking about trading back. So the Jets are going with Nolan Smith. Makes a lot of sense. And that's somebody that I did have kind of earmarked for the Vikings if he were to drop. But, with his NFL combine running a sub 4.4 as an outside linebacker, probably wasn't likely to drop. And once again, Robert Saleh, San Francisco connection, they just draft defensive linemen all the time. And they picked Jermaine Johnson last year as well. So that pairs him with him. I mean, that's somebody who could step in right away. From Alex here, with all the options left, you think it's more likely than ever that they trade down? I think that, yeah. I mean, I've always felt like it was super likely. And yes, I do feel that if there's multiple receivers, multiple corners, it does make sense for them to trade down even more than it did, especially if they don't want Will Levis, who it's just every pick, it becomes more and more likely. And one thing we knew was somebody was dropping from the quarterback class. I think that was one of the first things we said to start the show, was like, somebody will drop. I don't know if it's him or Richardson. And the fact that it's turned out to be Will Levis, if it was Richardson, I think we'd be going, okay, are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? Are you going? But now that it's Levis, a lot of you are uncomfortable with that. And that's, from Aaron here. Thanks for watching, Aaron. Nervous they're making a Ponder-like decision. I guess what I would say is, when it comes to the Ponder thing, that's going to haunt you folks forever. It seems that they made that pick and they reached and it didn't work out, and it was miserable for everybody for a long time to watch Christian Ponder, and it just never came to fruition. But that was a long time ago now. And you got to it's a totally different regime. It's actually 2 regimes. I'm not saying that I think Will Levis is a good idea. I have as many questions about Will Levis as you guys do, those of you who are nervous. I just think that if they pick him, I won't look back and say it's like him, because you could also say it's like other quarterbacks who have dropped that have been big successes as well. But I mean, maybe the better comparison, by the way, is like, maybe the better comparison could be Paxton Lynch or, Christian Hackenberg for somebody like Will Levis. So, I think that there probably is kind of comps there, but if the team believes in him, then it's very hard for me to say, wow, you guys don't know what you're doing, because there have been so many times where we've thought, man, is Justin Herbert going to be that good? He's got the big arm, but he didn't have the best numbers or this or that. And then Herbert becomes a franchise quarterback. We've just seen these criticisms happen, and then the player totally surprise us because the NFL is just so much different. And I am not advocating the Levis decision. I mean, I've been nervous about that, like you guys have. Like, I don't know, the numbers, the accuracy, very concerning. But the point just being that when you have arm talent like that, size like that, strength like that, it gives you a chance to be a good quarterback. And there's Carson Wentz comparisons with Will Levis, which I know probably makes you kind of throw up in your mouth. But at the same time, Carson Wentz, before he had that knee injury, was a pretty darn good quarterback on a rookie contract. So I don't know. I mean, I swing back and forth a lot with the Will Levis thing. From Dan, Levis lost me eating a banana with the peel on it. I mean, that's one I can't disagree with you, man. And I'm the person who eats Taco Bell all the time, but that was too wild for me. So yeah, anyway, trying to get to more of your comments here, scrolling through them as we go along. The Jets on the board here, taking, let's see. I always have to wait for the graphic because I don't have the sound on, so you guys hear it before I do. But it's just going to be a wide receiver here. Anyway, so we'll see about the Levis thing. But I think if you're starting to get anxious about Levis, I mean, it's getting real. It is absolutely getting real with the possibility of Will Levis dropping down the board. Will McDonald, wow, another pass rusher. Now, this was a guy that I really had earmarked for the Vikings. This to me is an overdraft, but also a really potentially good player. But how about the New York Jets going all in on these pass rushers? That is wild. Iowa exposed Will Levis like they did Blaine Gabbert, both in the bowl games. Here's the thing. I know that when it's a guy who's got big muscles and he's like tough and whatever, there's an immediate want to say, no, he's Blaine Gabbert. No, he's, who's the other one? The Jake Locker, that I think is a reasonable comparison. I mean, I get it because he kind of looks like them, but that's sort of doing the same thing as when we say Anthony Richardson is Joe Webb, right? I mean, like, it's doing a little bit of the same thing. It's just kind of like generally looking at someone's how they're shaped, and right, like a tall, tough, strong guy, and just saying, well, he's just like that other guy. That I'm not interested in doing that. I mean, I think we have to evaluate everything with Will Levis if that turns out to be something the Vikings consider. Or that they do. We have to look at every part of his game as an individual and not just go back and say, well, these other guys that kind of looked like him didn't work out. Because you could also say the same thing for Josh Allen and Justin Herbert. Both are big dudes, big giant dudes, super strong, who did not have the best statistics in college or didn't play the best in college and had lots of questions and ended up working out. Now, they didn't drop this far, but I'm not sure that I can make a lot out of the fact that they've dropped this far. It is very funny that Aaron Rodgers still didn't get a wide receiver. Now he's got Garrett Wilson though. Okay. So they're in pretty good shape, but drafting the edge rushers. Wow. The Jets really going all in on this. I am quite surprised that they decided to do this. Yeah. I mean, Joe, I think that this is a comparison, Drew Lock and Will Levis, if he drops out of the first round. If he drops out of the first round, then it will be, look, it was all bogus all along. And this is why we don't trust mock drafters. I won't do that rant until he drops out of the first round, but that rant's coming. That rant's coming. If Will Levis goes out, look, the consensus mock drafts had Will Levis as a top 10 pick. And so far he's gone quite a bit farther than that, and he could keep on sliding because nobody knows anything. And I mean, it's very clear that these teams don't put it out there, and I try every year to beat the drum. Guys, mocks are for fun, and we love them, and we have a lot of fun. They're not reports. They're not reports. Mocks aren't reports. Peter King, there's no better reporter than Peter King. He thought Anthony Richardson would drop to 23, he went fourth. I mean, Reddit is not a report. No one knows. You don't tell anybody outside the building or you get fired. That's it. So anyway, there's your mini rant. It'll ramp up if he drops to the second. From David, do you feel the way about Levis that you did about Josh Allen? I thought Josh Allen was going to be a total bust, to tell you the truth. I remember that a lot of my friends in Buffalo also thought the same thing. In fact, a lot of them thought that Josh Rosen would have been a much better pick because Josh Rosen had better numbers, that Josh Rosen was very accurate, great pocket presence, kind of had everything. I mean, he was a great prospect. He went high and he had all the things that go into being a good quarterback. And I agreed. I thought the same exact thing, that, you know, Josh Rosen was a way better choice than Josh Allen. And then it went completely the opposite way. And it turned out to be Josh Allen's a star and Josh Rosen is on the Vikings, by the way, as their third quarterback. And they picked him up toward the end of the year. And on his fourth or fifth team. I mean, it's crazy how this works out. We really don't ever know. I'll tell you who really, really doesn't know is the people who claim to know. The mock drafters, the draft reporters, I'm hearing this, that, the other thing. And every single year, it's just proven to be completely bogus. And it's remarkable how that happens. And here we are again with it happening again. With the people who told you that Will Levis was just as good of a prospect as Anthony Richardson, they were completely wrong, as they always are, which is fine. I just wish that they would tell you that. I just wish that they would stop pretending. Look, Carolina had Bryce Young locked in from the second they made that trade. That was happening. And yet so many people reported like, oh, they're still looking at this, that. No, they weren't. Okay. No, they weren't. So it's just a lot of nonsense just gets put out there into the ether, and everybody knows that all of their garbage is not going to be held accountable ever again. So you can report whatever you want. But with Will Levis sliding down the board, more proof that the people who claim to know don't know leading into the draft. One of my favorite parts of it, because A, every year I get to do this rant, but B, it keeps it very, very unpredictable. And now the Commanders are on the board. And if they're not picking him, then Tampa Bay is like the only other team. I mean, maybe, I guess you could have a team like Seattle or a team like Detroit. You could, but this is one of two that we kind of earmarked as a Will Levis type of team. From Stephanie, do you have different rants pre-written? The rants are never written. No, they're always off the just when I start to get fired up, usually about draft Twitter or whatever. But yeah, I mean, this is starting to get very, very interesting. It's also starting to look like the Vikings could have some real serious opportunities for players. And now Emmanuel Forbes going to Washington. So that seems like it's a bit of an overdraft here for them, jumping up to get a playmaking corner who is undersized. But here we are, Christian Gonzalez and Joey Porter Jr., Jackson Smith-Njigba. These guys are all on the board. I mean, this is really, really something that Washington goes with Forbes, and things are playing out very favorably for the Vikings to potentially draft a wide receiver. Here we go. From Dan, wants a pie chart. Actually, interestingly, multiples of you wanted pie charts. All right, let's pie chart. Let's do it. And I would love you to participate with pie charting. Possibilities for the Vikings, I think corner, wide receiver, Will Levis, and other. I'm going to go, or trade down. You want to go trade down as the other one? So let's go trade down. I'm going to say 50%. I'm still saying like 50-50 chance that they trade down. I will go, okay, we want a metal intro. Pie chart. There you go. I'll do anything you guys ask here. We got a few more picks to go before I have to be serious. So, no, but I'll go 50% a trade down. I will go 20-20 split. No, I want to go, I'm going to lose track here. I want to go like 30 with a corner, 20 with a wide receiver, and then that's the whole thing, isn't it? I can't give 0 to Will Levis. Maybe I should go 25, 15, and 10. How about we do that? So 50, 25 to a corner, 15 to a receiver, and 10 to Will Levis. So we'll see. Things are getting interesting here with the cornerback position as well. So there was your attempt at a pie chart, but I kind of, in the same way that often happens with pie charts, sort of got confused at the, adding up to 100. But I still think there's a 50% chance that the Vikings are still going to trade down here. But you have to have a partner. And whether they can get a partner to trade down, that I don't know. So Christian Gonzalez off the board. So 2 corners in a row. Now that leaves Joey Porter Jr. Gonzalez going off the board is a big one here for the Vikings because it really, in my mind, leaves 2 more corners as potential first-round picks, and that is Christian Gonzalez and Deonte Banks. I think those are the only 2 other ones that have a chance to go in the first round. So if it's not Deonte Banks, if it's not Joey Porter Jr., if they get taken in the lead up here, then I think the Vikings would either look at receiver or trade down for something else. But these receivers, they haven't been touched. People do not love the receivers. And, a very wise person, I don't know if they're watching now or not, asked a question early in the draft, middle of the draft, that was really stuck out to me as a fans-only questions, the podcast we do, where the fans get kind of all the questions and topics for the show, is they asked if this year's receiver class was like last year's quarterback class. And I think that observation is kind of proving to be true. There might only be one here in the first round, and there might have been just a lot of smoke screening about, hey, we don't care if these guys are undersized and everything else. And this is a good point from Miles that Kalijah Kancey's still on the board. Would anybody be mad? I should have included in the pie chart. I guess that could have been other. But Kalijah Kancey is still on the board, and the Vikings could look for interior pass rush. I mean, that would make a lot of sense. And, Kancey is another one where I would think that it's a really good pick. I mean, this is a good point that, it's been really since Sheldon Richardson that they had interior pressure. Sharif Floyd was the guy that was supposed to create interior pressure. And that has not happened in recent years with the interior rush. So now we're looking at a board that could have a lot of interesting players. I'm starting to think that trading down might not happen. Oh no, Will Levis, he's getting hugs from his mom. That's not good. He's starting to feel the pressure of being that guy that got overhyped, that once was Johnny Manziel or Aaron Rodgers or everything else. But, I would also say that if the Vikings did trade down and take a wide receiver, it's still a good play because, wide receiver is still such a valuable position, but they might not think that those guys are worth those draft picks because each one of them has flaws. Smith-Njigba, though, are we doing the thing about the guy playing in the slot again? Because that was kind of the criticism for Smith-Njigba. And I don't know if I really buy into that after Justin Jefferson became the best receiver in the NFL, and that's why he dropped. So, if the Vikings want to go back to that, they can. Will Levis did look pretty upset. And look, if this is the hard part about the whole draft situation is like, if you're getting told over and over again by everybody, top 5 pick, Indy wants you, so forth. And then you're sitting here right now at what pick are we on? Number 18. You haven't picked yet, but Tampa Bay is coming up next and Seattle is after that. I think both of those teams, I kind of overlooked Seattle as a potential for Will Levis, but when you think about it, a short-term contract for Geno Smith, he's in his 30s. Are they buying Geno Smith? And I guess I wouldn't count out Detroit as a potential for Levis as well. I don't think they'll do it here, but Tampa Bay, Seattle, very, very possible. And some of you are asking, I haven't opened the Diet Dr. Pepper yet. Maybe it's time. We're 2 hours in. And if you guys have been watching the whole time, thank you so much. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate all of you joining. Is it time? I think it's time. Or should we wait till Will Levis gets picked? I might die of dehydration. I don't know. Well, I guess we'll see. I think it's time. I think it's time to open the Diet Dr. P. All right. Sorry if that was loud into the microphone. Here we go. All right, second wind as we lead into the Vikings pick. I'm starting to think more and more that it is possible that they pick at 23. The way that this board is falling, because there just is so many potential players. You guys mentioned Kalijah Cansey, Deonte Banks, Joey Porter Jr. I mean, yeah, look, Angela, I wish this was product placement. Diet Dr. Pepper, I've been promoting them for years. They have never reached out. We've tweeted them, whatever, to sponsor the show, but that's all right. Still a wonderful product. Anyway, yeah, this will give me a little new life here, especially if they pick Will Levis. Then I'm really going to need the extra boost. But yeah. Okay, this is I don't want to hurt my equipment, but if they drafted a quarterback, like breaking 2 Diet Dr. Peppers open and chugging them at the same time would be a clip that people could pull from years to come to tweet out or whatever. Cherry Diet Dr. Pepper, the best. I've had cream soda Diet Dr. Pepper. It was okay. Did I get a beverage with Taco Bell? Yeah, I had a Diet Pepsi. It is what it is. That's what they have there. Shout out to Culver's for switching over to Diet Coke, though. That's where we're at. How similar is Will Levis to Josh Allen? Mobility, athleticism, strong arm, toughness. I think the arm strength is about close. I don't know if it's totally equal. The mobility is not the same. Now, I don't know. I don't remember if Josh Allen was a prolific runner in college. Here's a funny development with both him and Daniel Jones, that they became more of runners in the NFL than they were in college. Will Levis is mobile, though. Like, he's big. I mean, this is the thing, is when you're that big, this is why it works for Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is pretty fast, but he's not blazing fast. And he ran a similar 40 to Josh Allen, which is not crazy. I think it was in the 4.7s. But when you're 6'5", and you're 230 pounds and you're running, I mean, you guys saw this from Dante Culpepper back in the day. ESPN's analytics, this is on TV right now, said there was a 1.8% chance that he would be on the board at 18. So there you go. There's the accuracy of the mocks, as always. But this man looks frustrated. He looks upset. His girlfriend's trying to make him laugh. His mom's giving him hugs. I mean, ESPN loves this. They love this more than anything, right? Like, let's show sad Will Levis over and over and over and over again. But to your point, I don't want to say that someone can be Josh Allen, because Josh Allen is kind of a unique animal all in himself. He was so bad statistically in college and then so great in the NFL, but only after 3 years did he really become great. And we also have to consider, too, as we're talking about the Vikings drafting a quarterback, that, I think that Justin Jefferson has to be brought up here, that whoever you're getting, you're pairing him with Justin Jefferson, and that has to help the odds. And the same thing goes for Josh Allen. There is a similarity there that, when Josh Allen suddenly became more accurate and excellent, he had Stephon Diggs. And before he had Stephon Diggs, he wasn't as good. Okay, so a lot of you are freaking out about the Lions. I haven't seen it yet on my TV. I'll be interested to see what this is. Detroit going Detroit, LOL. Okay, wow, we've got something going on here. And we're getting closer. We are getting closer here to the Vikings pick. Closing in on only a few. Oh, a linebacker, Jack Campbell from Iowa. A linebacker and a running back, very unusual for a first round, I would say. Jack Campbell is somebody that we talked about for the Vikings and who has really, really good numbers. I mean, I compare him kind of to Anthony Barr a little bit in size, speed, his ability to do everything. He was good in coverage. He was good against the run. That Iowa defense was fantastic. Drafting a linebacker here is a little rich for me. Yep. I think he'll be a good player, though. And so this is what the Lions are doing. And it's a fallacy. So, keep that in mind. This is a bit of a fallacy. But it's sort of like when the Kansas City Chiefs did this same thing. When they drafted Clyde Edwards-Helaire, it was the same sort of deal where it's like, we just need one more player. We just need one more player. This is the top player on our board. This is our biggest need. and they ignored the positional value, and it hurt them. And then last year they changed course, and they went with receiver and Sky Moore. They went with Trent McDuffie. They went with George Karlaftis, and it worked out better for them. So I think that Detroit is kind of buying a little bit into the fallacy of, well, we just need this one more player, this one guy to fill this spot. And if they were going to take Jack Campbell, they probably should have moved down. It is not a great history for traditional linebackers in the back end of the first. This is your Kenneth Murray. It's your Patrick Queen. And again, it's always from win now teams. And it's always from, we just need this one thing. It's worth bringing up that after this, we could see a run on those receivers because the Ravens just re-signed Lamar Jackson. Do they want to give him a present? And the Chargers need a receiver. The Bucks pick is in here. We'll see if this is Will Levis. If it is not, then it is quite serious. It is quite serious with that possibility for the Minnesota Vikings. I think that then look, if Will Levis, like right now, he's in the Vikings range, that they could trade up and get him with Seattle if they want. And if they decide not to, and he goes into the second round, then I think we'll have to say, all right, the league just totally missed on that. And there was something interesting that stuck out to me, and I know it's from an old friend that probably some of you don't love, but Rick Spielman did a video for the 33rd team, and he was talking about how he just didn't like anything he saw from Will Levis's pro day, that it like intermediate throws were all over the map and his technique was not that good and everything else. And look, Rick made some mistakes, but he's a scout. Like he knows those things, what to look for in a player. And I kind of took that to heart a little bit, thinking like maybe there's other people in the scouting world and GM world who are thinking the same way. And it seems like that's exactly what is going on. So the Bucks are on the board here. We'll see how it goes with their pick. And then if they don't take him, it gets to be very, very serious with Vikings Will Levis. And if they don't pick him and he's taken right after, same with Kenny Pickett, same with Mac Jones. Like we're talking about, is this something that they're going to regret? But if he drops to the second, then I won't talk that way. If Levis makes it to the second, I will not say that the Vikings maybe will have regrets about that, because that means he just wasn't a first round prospect. All right. Tampa Bay is taking everybody's favorite guy, Kalijah Cansey. It's a great pick for them. Undersized, super, super fast, tons of production. I mean, he would have been great for the Vikings as a pick, but let's talk about it though. This was the only real defensive lineman to take here. The other rushers, Will McDonald and Nolan Smith, those guys were the only ones that I thought could be potentially taken here. Miles Murphy is an interesting one that might be under discussion as far as defensive line, but maybe not. Corners, you got one, really, maybe two, I guess. Deonte Banks, Joey Porter Jr. All the receivers, though, if you're the Vikings and the receivers get to you, now these next couple picks are big because Seattle, we'll see what they do, but the Chargers and the Ravens are both teams that could take receivers. If it gets to 23 and Jackson Smith-Njigba is still on the board, you have to do that. Dan talked me into Will Levis. It's not hard. It is not hard for me to talk you into Will Levis. I really don't think so. I think that it's if you're out on it, then it's a little bit of overconfidence if the Vikings draft him. If he goes to the second, then I'm going to believe the NFL that he just was never that good of a prospect to begin with. If the Vikings take him, it means that they looked at him analytically. They looked at him through the eyes of an NFL quarterback in Kevin O'Connell. They looked at how he's going to fit and what his upside can be, how he's going to look after he develops a year. And they said, let's do it. And if they do that and they decide he's the guy, then how can we say that's a bad pick other than just the overconfidence of saying like, oh, his stats weren't that good. But the stats have not been that predictive. And clearly the Colts felt that way about Anthony Richardson. It just hasn't been that predictive. Oh, that's an interesting scenario. What if they take Hooker instead of Levis? same deal. Same deal. Like that means that Kevin O'Connell, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the scouting staff, the front office, the offensive coordinator, that they're all buying into Hendon Hooker, and you're going to put him in an offense with Justin Jefferson and a throwing offense that pushes the ball or wants to push the ball down the field. Didn't do it enough for my liking last year, but wants the ball pushed down the field. He is smart. He is accurate. I mean, mobile, like all those things. If they do it, then I think it's a great pick. And look, I don't know if it's going to blow up or not. I don't. It's a great pick to take a quarterback because then you know who your future quarterback is going to be. And you also, at the same time, not only just know who your quarterback's going to be, have a year to evaluate the guy. That's really important as well. And so if we go through these two quarterbacks and this very real possibility that could be coming up here in the next couple picks, as we are almost 2.5 hours in and rolling into this situation that we talked about going in, like, what if someone's on the board? What if someone drops? Could they be the team? We've heard all year, all draft season, Vikings, quarterbacks, doing their research, everything else. There's lots of mocks of the Vikings taking Will Levis, lots of mocks of them taking Hendon Hooker. It's very real right now as we go into these final couple picks because the Chargers aren't taking a quarterback and the Ravens are not taking a quarterback. So if Seattle does not do it on the other side of this TV break, then the Vikings are going to have him on the board, or what? Well, two potential first-round quarterbacks on the board. And it gets pretty wild for whether they're going to trade down, take a receiver, take the quarterback, because if they don't, then all of it was smoke. Then all of it was just people trying to connect dots and taking wild guesses. But if they do, then the Vikings are going to have their quarterback for the future and then get a year to evaluate him behind Kirk Cousins. Or if it's Will Levis, I mean, they could even still trade Kirk Cousins after June 1st. I'd be shocked by that, but they could. I mean, maybe if they draft a quarterback, then, he'll demand a trade. I don't know. That's what happened with Sam Bradford. That's how Sam Bradford ended up as a Viking, is that the Philadelphia Eagles took Carson Wentz and Sam Bradford wanted out. Or, another option too is if the quarterbacks are on the board and there is a team that wants a quarterback that the Vikings don't want. Now, do you make that trade though? Are you willing to do that? I don't know. I don't know if you're willing to give another team the quarterback, because that could be, although, they've not been afraid of looking bad, but if they were to trade back to give another team a quarterback when they need one so badly, I don't know. Will Levis or wide receiver? What are we thinking? I think they will pick a receiver. I don't think that they will pick, or a corner. I don't think they'll pick Will Levis, but I could be instantly wrong about this. I think they'll pass on him, and it looks more and more like he's not a first-round pick, just the way that it's played out, because so many of these teams have a good case for him that he just kept going by and by and by. The Falcons didn't want him. Washington didn't want him. Look at that. The ESPN analytics, because the ESPN analytics were based on mock drafts, which are guesses. That's why. But there's always one. And it gets to be that guy. And they will keep showing him until he's drafted, no matter what. It is, I need more Diet Dr. Pepper, folks. It's getting hot in here. Okay. I'm scrolling down your, just say no to hookers. Yeah. We've done a good job on this stream so far of not having terrible puns. And I try, on an important night like this, but I couldn't help it with that one. I agree, CJ, that Jackson Smith and the Jigba here would be flat out incredible. I mean, it would just be incredible for the Vikings to put him with Justin Jefferson, knowing that you could have him on the rookie contract for multiple seasons. This is important now. We only ever talk about this with quarterbacks. We never talk about it with other premium positions. But if you have a rookie quarterback or a rookie wide receiver contract, that's almost like a quarterback. That's like 20 something million between what it would cost. And Jefferson's going to be very expensive. You need someone who is inexpensive to go along with him. So if they decide to go Jackson Smith-Njigba, that's getting an A for me. Even if they decide to pass on the quarterbacks. Man, we are getting serious, though, in quarterback land. The Seahawks pick is in, and we're approaching it here. And we might have all this build up, and they might trade down because they actually do have now multiple players that would be pretty good for them. All the wide receivers. Zay Flowers has not gone yet. Quentin Johnston has not gone yet. Everybody is on the board for them, which means if they decided to drop back, they could take whoever they wanted, or if it's Deonte Banks, or if it's Joey Porter Jr. I mean, there's opportunities here for the Vikings to potentially trade back, knowing that there are multiple players that could be on their board that are very high. So Seattle's pick is in, and trying not to spoil from seeing who they're taking, but let's just say that there's going to be some more people still on the board for the Vikings, but one could be off here. And now two teams that are very much in the ballpark, and I'll announce it in a second, but very much in the ballpark for wide receivers. It would be a huge mistake, I think, if Los Angeles or Baltimore went at any other position. And the fact that Baltimore was willing to pay Odell Beckham what they decided to pay Beckham, that to me was a sign that they could take another wide receiver. That Lamar Jackson, I think a part of his frustration was, I don't know if it was not enough investment, because they did draft Hollywood Brown in the second. They drafted Rashad Bateman in the second, but just not enough good wide receivers, not enough weapons when you're seeing some other of your peers surrounded with weapons. I think he wants to have better guys to throw to as opposed to just a tight end. So now we've got a whole team of people who are going to announce the Seattle pick. And now the time in between every pick leading up to 23 is excruciating for all of you as we count down here after this Seattle pick to two more before the Minnesota Vikings. But, this is a good and interesting point from Alex, that there's a lot of good prospects left. And at some point you have to take quality over quantity. It's just that if you have like three guys that you think are very similar prospects, you can probably trade down. But if they don't, then they should just go for it. I think they should probably just go for it. I like trading down, but I think you should probably just go for it. All right. People are upset in the comments with Seattle because Jackson Smith-Njigba is getting picked here. And that is a great pick for Seattle. Great pick. This is a great draft for Seattle. Seattle's crushing this draft. And Smith-Njigba makes sense to drop down to this area. But now you have, again, two more teams that are looking for wide receivers. In the Chargers, they could go Addison, they could go Flowers, and then the Ravens as well, which, maybe I'm overdoing it. The Ravens love to draft defensive players, so maybe I'm overdoing it. But Banks, Porter Jr., Addison, all these guys are still on the board. The Viking, and not to mention Will Levis, who we haven't mentioned in like 4 seconds. So there's that. They're going to have quite a decision here. Does somebody want to trade up for Will Levis? Do the Minnesota Vikings believe in Will Levis? Does no one believe in Will Levis? Will Levis might be, it's funny because I don't know how many times somebody said this year in the lead up, like, hey, is Anthony Richardson Malik Willis? Might have been Will Levis that was Malik Willis instead, because it was all physical tools and projection and nothing to do with his actual skill. At least that's how it's looking at the moment, but that could change in a second. These two teams are not drafting quarterbacks. So the Vikings will have it on the board to decide if they want to draft Will Levis or Hendon Hooker. You know how I was making fun of the flyover earlier? The drama is absurd here. The drama is absurd. I have to tell you the truth. I thought that all 4 quarterbacks were going to be gone. As ESPN Analytics told us about 7 times on the TV, there did not seem to be much of a chance. But earlier today, when Ian Rappaport said that if a quarterback gets past number 4, then all of a sudden there's not as many teams that look like they are desperate to take a quarterback. And yeah, I agree with all of you, by the way, who are saying Seattle's offense looks fantastic. It sure does. And their offensive line was actually good last year. So, kind of watch out when it comes to that. Let's see. Let's see if the Vikings like one of these quarterbacks. Can they trade back and still get one? I don't know because are the teams behind them looking for quarterbacks that they could potentially trade up? I'm going to check the draft order here. Doesn't look like it to me. No, I don't think that there's there's nobody in the first round that would trade up. I mean, you're talking Jacksonville, the Giants, Dallas, Buffalo, Bengals, Saints. These teams all have quarterbacks. Either Will Levis goes now to the Vikings or he doesn't go in the first round. That's the way it looks at this moment. And if the Vikings take Will Levis, I am preparing you for my take right now that I will just side with Kevin O'Connell. And I will believe that Kevin O'Connell must have evaluated the ever-loving heck out of this Kentucky quarterback. And remember, there's even a Los Angeles Rams connection with Liam Cohen, who worked for Kentucky, that had also been on the Los Angeles Rams, that he would have tremendous insight into Will Levis. So if they all get together and they all believe in him, then I think it's a great pick and he could sit. But I don't actually know. You know what? So they could trade back though. No, you're right. Now that I'm thinking about this, what Len was asking about, because none of these teams actually want Will Levis, they don't have to take him at 23 because they all have quarterbacks in place. They could trade back and still take him if they want him. Just based on those teams. I mean, even you could go into the second round. The teams even early in the second round, they could go all the way back, and this would drive all of you insane, and me too. Looking at the draft order right now, and just if Jonathan, jump in here if I'm unclear on it and how it's changed from some of the trades, but it looks to me like 36 with the Rams is the next team that would consider, because the Rams, Matt Stafford is short term there, that would consider it, but they could drop even all the way back there into the mid 30s because none of these teams are drafting quarterbacks. I mean, even the Raiders, Seattle, they might be thinking about it in the second round, but they could definitely decide to go back and still make that move. Do I got that right, Jonathan? Yeah. Does it look to you like there isn't anybody who needs a quarterback for kind of a long time? So this doesn't have to happen at number 23.
No, they could trade back into the early parts of the second round with all the trades that have happened. The next team that looks like it, if the Vikings pass on either of these quarterbacks, is going to be the Rams. There's 3 picks in a row: the Rams, the Seahawks, and the Raiders. And we know the Seahawks and Raiders already passed on these guys. The Seahawks passed on them twice. So does that mean they'll continue to pass on them because they don't believe in them, or they were just waiting for them to drop in the second round? Yeah, there's 3 picks in a row there in the early part of that second round. But after that, you get all the way down to Tennessee at 41, which is 10 picks in. You get down to Atlanta at 13 in the second round. So these guys could keep falling, and the Vikings could find a way to trade back up into the second round.
Yeah, I remember looking at the very ESPN analytics that they keep referencing about how shocking this is that Will Levis is falling. And one thing I noticed was they had Hendon Hooker to a couple teams, but then they didn't see another opportunity with Hendon Hooker for quite a while in the draft order. And the same thing goes for where we stand right now. Is I don't see another team that is going to want to draft a quarterback. So if the Vikings don't believe in Will Levis, this man is not being picked until the middle of tomorrow. And that is going to be a massive Jimmy Clausen-like drop from someone who is projected by some to be drafted at the very top. And I guess once again, I'll have some questions for a lot of alleged evaluators of what exactly it was that they saw in Will Levis that they thought he was going to be a top draft pick. But again, we'll withhold that rant till the end of the night. Quentin Johnston to the Chargers. Now, this was a guy that he was in the final draft sim, Don't you love how Jonathan just disappears like that? He was in the final draft sim when I did it for the draft guide. That was who I put with the Vikings. So he now gets taken to the Chargers. This here with the Ravens is this Jordan Addison. And then the Vikings are looking at potentially drafting Joey Porter Jr. I got to say that if it's Joey Porter Jr., that is a really good pick. If it's Deonte Banks, it's a really good pick. If it's Jordan Addison, it's a really good pick. Those are the guys you stay at 23 for. And what I've noticed is that the trading down has stopped. That early in the draft, everybody was trading down, shuffling around. But I don't think we've had one in quite some time. It seems like the board is the board for some of these teams, and they're just taking picks with their own selection. So the Vikings are going to have a choice here of whether they want to move down or not, or if they just want to go for it and take Will Levis at 23 and not try to fiddle around and get too cute if they want their quarterback to be who it is. But yeah, I mean, everything is laid out here for the Vikings. Quentin Johnston, I think, is a really nice prospect, though. I've liked him all the way through. I think he's going to be great with Justin Herbert. What do you got, Jonathan?
I don't got anything new. I was just going to add to your Quentin Johnston take that wide receiver group, especially with their new offensive coordinator there. I think that offense is set up along with Seattle's offense when the 3 wide receivers that they have there as well. Those 2 offenses did a really good job in this draft with their picks.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And Zay Flowers, by the way, still on the board. I mean, the Vikings have their choice here.
Yeah.
They are spoiled for choice when it comes to who they want to pick here. And that could mean a trade down. That if they're not taking Will Levis, then this could mean a trade down for the Vikings, because with Johnston off the board and Smith-Njigba off the board, Addison and Flowers might be looked at as being similar prospects. I have thought that Addison was a better prospect than Zay Flowers, but the NFL might not agree. Joey Porter Jr. dropping this far. I think that Jeremy makes a good observation here. He's 6'3". How many corners are that size? Not that many, but he's also, maybe fitting the mold of something that, Brian Flores might really like, which is a super lanky, super tall cornerback.
We also got Nolan Smith available, and the Vikings could see a good fit for him if they move on from Danielle Hunter in June.
Yeah, wow. There's a lot of players on the board here. So Flowers and Addison, who would I pick? I would pick Addison because I think Flowers is below the level of height, weight that fits with the NFL, at least historically. Now, I did the article about how, that might be a little bit of a fallacy. It's like hard to say by the data. But if I'm picking the USC receiver, who is a tremendous route runner, he's a little on the lighter side, but gets open. I think that would be a great fit when it comes to playing with Justin Jefferson, somebody that, you can scheme up to get on man coverage and make plays. Zay Flowers was much more of a slot receiver. Both of them played in the slot, but Zay Flowers was like really a slot receiver. I don't know that the Vikings need him. What about Myles Murphy? That's a good question. I like it. I mean, pass rusher. I would definitely be on board going pass rusher for the Vikings. Myles Murphy is an upside type of guy, but did have good production at Clemson. He was one of those that jumped on the scene really early on as a freshman. And because he didn't blow the roof off of college football, he kind of dropped. Like maybe going into last year, he was considered a top 5 pick, and he still had a good season, but they need that type of player. I am slightly skeptical about pass rushers that drop this far. There is a bit of a history of guys who are drafted in the back end of the first round who have been more on tools than they have been on production, and that always concerns me a little bit. From Sloth, this is so easy for me. If they pick Levis, Kevin O'Connell likes him and I'm in. If they pass, he sucks, and thank God we got the other guy instead. Either way, I'm having a shot of Jaeger. There you go. Well, bottoms up for the Diet Dr. Pepper to you. And yeah, I mean, it's getting tense. It's getting tense for sure. But Porter, Banks, You have the wide receivers. There is a lot to like. Nolan Smith, the 4.3 pass rusher, 4.39 at the combine. Yeah. I mean, this has turned out to be a very much ideal situation for the Vikings, and it might end up being an ideal situation to trade back. That is looking more and more like it, but who wants to trade up is the question. Do the Jaguars want to trade up? They just drafted Trayvon Walker last year. Do they need a pass rusher? Do they need a corner? Maybe they might. The New York Giants are kind of all in. So could they want Jordan Addison or Zay Flowers? There's been kind of a Zay Flowers connection with them in a lot of the mock drafts and things. But are there teams that could want to trade back? So the Ravens pick is in. And as soon as they make it, oh, look at you, Jonathan. You've created a Vikings on the clock. This is how much Jonathan put into it. Everybody should thank producer Jonathan Harrison for how much he has done in his effort to make this a really fun show for us. So it's time, folks. The Minnesota Vikings are on the clock. And Jonathan, you might see it before me. So if you want to pop in and make that announcement as soon as you know it, this one, I think we should probably spoil and just start talking about it anyway. Maybe we should take a vote on that, but I don't know if I want to wait as soon as we see who it's going to be to talk about it. So the Ravens pick is in, and the Vikings are on the clock, and everyone is super scared. Is it going to be Will Levis? Is it going to be a trade down? But I just am feeling more and more like they're going to take a player here because there hasn't been a whole lot of interest, it seems, in trading into this area. And maybe because everybody is realizing there's a lot of very similar caliber prospects to, the type of players that are here for wide receiver, for the key positions, for pass rusher. For some reason I kind of had it in my head that like there wasn't anybody who would be a pass rusher here, but you guys brought up Smith and Murphy. Both of them are interesting at a position that the Vikings absolutely could need. And, you've got Flowers, who is a playmaking wide receiver, very exciting player. Are the Ravens going with Flowers here? Let's see. So they're announcing it right now, and then we'll know. Then we'll know what's on the board for the Vikings. Okay, so they are going Zay Flowers. All right, so the Vikings can pick Jordan Addison. They could pick Joey Porter Jr. They could pick Nolan Smith. They could pick Will Levis. They could pick Hendon Hooker. They could shock us and pick Drew Sanders. You never know. They could trade down. I mean, there are so many different things that they could do here. And in this lead up, there was one truth. And the truth was we didn't know. And the truth was that they had hundreds of different ways that they could go in this draft, from moving up, moving down. But I think it is hard to pass up on Joey Porter Jr. I did not expect him to be here. He was supposed to be a top 15 pick. I know you guys have been messed around with when it comes to first round cornerbacks over the years, that the Vikings have taken so many of them, but this is a terrific prospect in Joey Porter Jr. And I think if they decide to go that way, it's a good pick. I think he's probably the best player on the board, but how long have we been banging the drum for the Vikings to take a receiver to pair next to Justin Jefferson, or even going back even farther than that, to pair with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen? So there is a lot of options here. And if they pass on a quarterback, then what that means to me is either they would have to trade way up into the second round or late first to get Will Levis if they want him, if they don't pick him here, or it's not a quarterback this year. And we'll talk about that option as well. But if it's not a quarterback this year, then the Trey Lance thing is on the board, or even just tonight, the Trey Lance thing is still a possibility in the future. 2024 draft starts to become very, very interesting. I mean, we're going to have to start getting 2024 draft experts on the show like tomorrow if Will Levis is not picked right here by the Minnesota Vikings. They have so many options. I just think that this draft board with the running backs, with the tackles, has fallen really well to them. And yes, probably would have preferred to get one of these two receivers, especially Jackson Smith-Njigba, and these teams had kind of a run on those wide receivers here, but Jordan Addison is still on the board. And as of this moment, we got 5 minutes left clicking down on the clock. There's no Adam Schefter popping onto my TV to say it's a trade down. So it seems like the Vikings are going to make this pick, and they have their pick of the litter. And I think if they take Addison, if they take Porter Jr., they're in great shape. And if they take Hooker or Levis, the roof blows off this thing. And we're going to be talking about that for an entire offseason and beyond. So that we've got the Ravens draft room celebrating here, and now it is on to the Vikings. Wow. Yeah, I agree, Alex. I don't think they have a trade partner. I think that's what it is. That's probably most likely because it makes so much sense to trade back here when there are multiple players. But how far back would you be willing to go? Probably just a couple of spots, right? And if none of those teams want to trade up because they don't want one of these players desperately, then there's really nothing you can do. I've left out Deonte Banks out of that conversation, but Deonte Banks, a 100th percentile athlete by relative athletic scores, could be exactly the type of man-to-man corner that Brian Flores is looking like. But, this reminds me a little bit, in a way, of when the Vikings drafted Justin Jefferson, where we kept kind of saying, like, the board's looking pretty good for them. The board's looking pretty good for them. And then it worked out to get Justin Jefferson. Pie chart, who's the pick? Last second pie chart. Gotta do math fast. I will say Joey Porter Jr., 40%, Jordan Addison, 20%, Deonte Banks, 20%, trade down 10%, Will Levis, 10%. I have no idea what those percentages. I'm under too much pressure to do a pie chart, but I've got Joey Porter Jr. at the top. Brian Branch is another one that has not been picked yet. He is kind of more of a safety maybe, but okay. So they're showing Kwesi on the phone on TV. Is this going to happen at the very last second that the Vikings will trade down? Very possible. Very possible. Who's our wild card here? I didn't even include a wild card. Are they trading back? The math checks out. Great. That's good to hear because I thought I was way off with the math. He's talking to Mike Zimmer. What do we got, Jonathan?
We ran a poll in the YouTube chat whether to spoil the pick or wait for the TV announcement, and 60% of the vote says spoil the pick, and that's after 125 votes. So we're going to spoil it. Sorry for the 40% who don't want us to, but as soon as I see it pop up in the Twitter feed, we're announcing it.
Okay. All right. Sorry to everybody. We got to spoil. It's just too important. Oh, there we got Vikings fans. We got the people in the chains. I mean, this is what a scene in Kansas City for this draft, and what drama has befallen us here, because I can't say I'm in shock about Will Levis. That some people had talked about Will Levis as the possible guy who dropped for quite a while. And it was like, wait, who's drafting him? Who's going to be that team? And now on the clock, I mean, we are going down to the final minute here. Are they going to make a trade? Are they going to make this pick? Are they going to let the clock run out Kevin Williams style? What are we doing? Yeah, exactly. Tick, 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 like Chris Berman used to say. Don't forget to make the pick, Vikings. At least it can't be worse. Hey, historically, 1 out of 1 times they let the clock run out, the guy turned into a 6-time All-Pro. I'm just saying, maybe they should do that. Make sure you hand in the card on time. There are so many options on the board. I'm still pie charting a corner here as the pick for the Vikings. But if it is a quarterback, then wow. Kevin Williams sure was some kind of mistake. That is true. Yeah, Kevin Williams, what a great player. So here we go into the final minute. Dropping down. Pick is in. All right.
I just saw across the feed. Here we go. Ready?
No trade down. So the thing that we had pie charted at the very beginning does not come to fruition, but I understand why, because there are so many good players on the board, and we're going to get this in
Here we
just
go,
seconds. Something that we have waited for how long?
The
for this
Vikings
to come to fruition. What do we got, Jonathan? Is it happening?
According to Albert Breer, the Vikings are taking wide receiver Jordan Addison.
Wow. Okay. How about that? The wide receiver that Purple Insider has pushed for I don't know how long. Jordan Addison, a tremendous route runner out of USC, short area quickness, playmaker, red zone monster, made Kenny Pickett a first-round draft pick, then went to USC and helped Caleb Williams become a tremendous quarterback prospect himself. I said at the very beginning of this broadcast that the one thing I would give them an A for was taking Jordan Addison, and they have taken Jordan Addison. They get an A from me. Not only do you partner Justin Jefferson with a receiver who can get open versus man coverage and has been very successful in college, but also you have your long-term guy to fill in next to him with a rookie contract. You have an advantageous situation. You have a pass-first offense for Jordan Addison. I think everything lines up favorably. This is a guy that 2 years ago caught 100 passes in Pitt, averaged 16 yards a catch, 17 touchdowns, and then last year, 59 receptions in 11 games, 15 yards a catch, 8 more touchdowns. He was one of the elite players in terms of yards per route run by Pro Football Focus, quality yards after catch, quick guy, good hands, younger, as it's brought up by Aaron in the comments. This to me is nothing short of an A pick. He is also of the height requirement as well. Not that he is super tall or that he is super thick, but I think we've seen it before. 5'11" and a little on the younger side is still a very, very viable wide receiver size. It is not Zay Flowers. It is not somebody who is super small like Josh Downs. I think that this is a excellent pick to set up for your future quarterback. This can help right away, and this can help big time for the next quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. Here's what this also says. They never believed in Will Levis, and they never believed in Hendon Hooker, and no mock drafters know what they're talking about, as always. But the Vikings passing on a quarterback here is part 2 to this conversation. So part 1 is, and wow, does this gentleman know how to dress? That is some kind of suit. But Jordan Addison can be a long-term option to set up for the next Minnesota Vikings quarterback. Imagine this, 2024, you get drafted as the Vikings quarterback. You have 2 first-round wide receivers. You have 2 elite offensive tackles. You have a quarterback coach. You have a pass-first offense. It's one of the best situations in the NFL. So not only if the Vikings, if the Vikings could draft a quarterback, but imagine that you are a team or a quarterback that is looking for a team, or if it's Trey Lance, or if it's an angsty veteran quarterback who's looking for another spot and he's gotten frustrated with his team. This is a landing spot for you. This is a landing spot for a draft pick to want to go for next year. And also this helps immediately as well, that the Vikings are not trying to just tank next season. They want Jordan Addison to step in. So I can't say enough how much I like this draft pick for the Vikings to take Jordan Addison as also the player that I had kind of thought had the most skills that would transfer over. And look, we learn lessons from what we see. I've seen Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen become successful receivers from route running, separation. That is what Jordan Addison does the best. He's got the production to go along with it. He did fine at the NFL Combine to meet the standards. He has a little bit of everything, and I would not be shocked at all if he ends up being the best wide receiver out of this entire class. This reminds me a lot now of A.J. Brown and of Devontae Smith in Philadelphia. Weapons are winning in the NFL, and Jordan Addison is the pick. A great job by the Vikings. Not to trade down, not to mess around. And you know what? I understand the argument to go defense. And that would be that the defense was really bad. But cornerbacks in the back end of the first round, to me, it's a much riskier position to take than it is wide receiver that you can put in this super favorable position. And I think that's one of the reasons we see more receivers succeed than corners, because corners, yes, there's zone versus man and everything else. But ultimately, it's if you get beat, like you're just not a good corner. If you have weaknesses as a receiver, you can find lots of ways to work that player in. And I think that the Vikings now, with Jordan Addison, who's played all over the field, with KJ Osborne, who works inside the slot more often, with Justin Jefferson, who can play anywhere, I think that the Vikings have one of the most dangerous and versatile groups of weapons in the NFL if Jordan Addison makes the jump from USC. But also recently, and again, helmet scouting not allowed, but recently we have seen a lot of these types, a little bit on the less weight, a little bit undersized, that as long as you create separation and you've got great instincts for the position, you can become a very good wide receiver. So we never know how it's going to play out. That's always something that we will say, always and forever, that we never know how someone's going to make that transition into the NFL. But boy, I think they picked a really, really good player to drop in. They made a really, really good bet on this player. And we didn't even mention TJ Hockenson as well, who I think that they will eventually sign to a long-term contract extension. So this is as good of a draft pick as the Vikings have made probably since Justin Jefferson, in my mind, where it fit positional value, it fit need, it fit the thing that drives success in the NFL, which is throwing the football. So a great pick by the Vikings, a great decision to just stay there and to not pick Will Levis and not go in on a quarterback who is clearly the Vikings and the NFL seeing as too inaccurate, far too flawed, and more of a Paxton Lynch, more of a Jimmy Clausen than a Josh Allen. So there's the take right off the bat. And to help, formerly an intern of Purple Insider, now works for PGAtour.com, but has been paying very close attention to the draft and had to include on this draft broadcast Paul Hodowanic to break it all down. I needed you here tonight, Paul. This is a Matthew and Paul Hodowanic moment, like so many big games were this year. So before you officially move away and everything else, you're still a Vikings follower forever. Your opinion, Paul Hodowanic, on Jordan Addison being selected with the number 23 overall pick.
I mean, Matt, how many times did we ask for this team to draft a number 3 wide receiver? Just year after year after year. They wouldn't listen to us. We wanted them to take Jameson Williams last year. We wanted to take them. Just every year we've been shouting from the rooftops for anyone that could hear us, get another receiver. And so obviously you lose Adam Thielen, but honestly, your number 2 wide receiver is going to be TJ Hockenson going into next year. This guy, Jordan Addison, is going to be, at least at the beginning, probably your number 3 target in terms of how many targets are kind of going around between Jefferson, Hockenson, and now Addison. I love it. I mean, even if Kirk Cousins isn't part of your long-term future, you've now set up this room with Jefferson, Addison, and Hockenson for whoever takes over from Cousins this next year. From everything I've read and watched of Addison, he's a great route runner. He's quick. He's sudden. He's going to really kind of fake people out and kind of make people miss in terms of both kind of in his routes and then after the catch. Obviously, the weight is a concern. He's very wiry, slim frame, so they're going to obviously need him to bulk up a little bit, or he just isn't going to be able to hang up as much in run blocking situations and if he gets kind of pressed at the line of scrimmage. So those are certainly real concerns. But just from a perspective of going all in and putting resources into your offense and into the positions that you need to put the resources into the most, this makes so much sense for them. He's the Biletnikoff winner from last year, just highly, highly productive at USC. Like, it's a lot of markers that it checks off. And so just from a process standpoint, you never know if these draft picks work out, but from a process standpoint, if you can do it better than most, like every time, you're going to end up with, better players more of the time. And so this is a great process pick. They didn't have to go up to get him. They kind of fell in his lap. I think he was Dane Brugler's second wide receiver. I think he was, he was kind of up and down right behind Jackson Smith and Jigba. And if Zay Flowers was ahead of him, Jordan Addison was usually the third wide receiver right in there. So proper value for them. They got it kind of right in the run of wide receivers. I think they could have traded back if they wanted to, and we can kind of talk about that. I just don't know if the market was there, because it seemed like the Ravens also were trying to trade back a pick before them. And then the Vikings took the clock all the way down to 30 seconds. So clearly they were maneuvering a bit. But to stay at their pick, they got to be pretty happy with who they got.
Well, I also think as the Giants take Deonte Banks, I also think the Giants would have taken Jordan Addison. I mean, because the Giants need a wide receiver. And if you were going to have to move back past teams that needed wide receiver, you could miss out on your guy. And I don't think they wanted to do that. Clearly, the NFL not as high on Joey Porter Jr. as we thought, and the edge rushers, that they're just not interested in some of the pass rushers until the back end here. But as far as staying at 23, taking your pick, when we talk about, I want to explain what surplus value means, because I throw it around all the time, and I think that maybe I don't take the time to kind of like break it down. If you draft a number 2 wide receiver and he becomes a very good player. Now let's go back and look at the production from Vikings number 2 wide receivers of past years. Many times they have been excellent. I mean, we're talking 100 catches in 2018 from the Vikings number 2 wide receiver, or 60 or 70 receptions from the number 2. How valuable has that been to Sam Bradford, to Teddy Bridgewater, to Case Keenum, to Kirk Cousins? And the thing is that if you wanted to get the Vikings number 2 wide receiver, it would cost you $15 to $20 million. This is where surplus value comes in. If you were paying Stephon Diggs, look what he gets paid, $20 million. Look what Adam Thielen still got paid. Look what Christian Kirk got paid. If you want a quality number 2 wide receiver, you are paying somewhere between 15, 17, and early $20 million. If you draft one that works out well, that means for 4 years, you get that guy at the 23rd overall pick is like $5 million or less. And that's where the surplus value is. What would this guy be worth if he works out versus what you're actually going to have to pay him? And so you start paying Justin Jefferson presumably pretty soon. And then you will have Jordan Addison be not expensive if he works out. It also will lighten the blow if KJ Osborne gets to the end of this year and doesn't want to remain a Minnesota Viking, which I think after tonight becomes more possible. The reason I like Jordan Addison now I like Quentin Johnston a lot, but the reason I liked Jordan Addison is the ball tracking is better. I think he's just that's a problem for Quentin Johnston. It's kind of a body catcher, more of a yards after catch guy. And Flowers was more of a slot wide receiver. And I don't think that really fits in with, you want to move Justin Jefferson to the slot pretty often. They needed an outside guy. And then that's not all Jordan Addison has done. When I look at his usage, he's been versatile, but he has played more often in the outside than he has in the slot, which I think the Vikings would look for that as something that they needed. And just reading what it says on PFF, Addison is one of the higher floors among receivers in this class due to his blend of route running chops and all-around athleticism. Production, route running, success in a big conference against good competition, 2 different schools he played extremely well for. It is really hard to make a case against this, Paul. I just feel like it checks every single box except for one. He doesn't play quarterback. So I want your opinion on, you know what? You missed a little half rant, but I can go back and do it again about the mock draft community.
Oh,
you want it? Why don't I just do it now? What's the deal, folks? What's the deal? I was told repeatedly by supposedly the most dialed in mock drafters in this here universe, in Roger Goodell's America in 2023, the most dialed in reporters, the smartest mock drafters, the greatest scouts who write all of their brilliant scouting reports because they're so good at scouting, once again have just gone total disaster in trying to pick out who the most obvious positions to watch are. These people have no idea what they're doing. And every year we get duped and fall for it repeatedly of the like, well, it makes so much sense. And people are saying, and an executive told me, and a scout told me. It's garbage. It's garbage. We can talk about the scenarios, but anybody who pretends that they know how to scout like the NFL, they don't. Okay. Don't believe that. I think the best draft analysts tell you the strengths and weaknesses of a player. But if they're going to tell you where these guys are going to go, they are just lying to you. It's completely fraudulent. So anyway, that's proof again here tonight. And it has been so many times over and over and over. And just ask Malik Willis. That poor guy thought he was going in the first round. And then this poor guy thought he was too, based on a bunch of bogus guessing from mock drafters. So the Vikings did not like Will Levis. They did not like Hendon Hooker, because if they did, they would have taken him here tonight. But those are not first-round quarterbacks. So tell me, Paul, your opinion on the Vikings passing on a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly would have been better if they picked Will Levis. It would have been better than Hendon Hooker in my mind. But yeah, I think it tells you, like, look at the teams that picked before the Vikings. There were some quarterback-needy teams that were there. The Seahawks passed twice on a quarterback. They have Geno, but they're obviously kind of in a similar spot with Kirk Cousins. I think they're only committed to Geno for 2 years. They certainly were interested in Anthony Richardson from all the reports that we had been heard. Tennessee Titans were in the mix for a quarterback. They passed on him. Washington is very confident apparently in Sam Howell, but I have to imagine if someone was good enough for them to threaten, I don't think Sam Howell's too far of a bar to clear. Like, you just go up and down, and plenty of teams passed on him, and now the Vikings have passed on him. So clearly the NFL is telling you something with that. So I think from the consensus, like big boards, he was around 26. So I definitely had an issue with him going off the board in that top 5 range. That talk about him going to the Colts just always felt nonsense to me, or just not nonsense in that obviously people felt like they knew what they were talking about, but nonsense in I didn't see the player in an early first round draft pick. Now you get to the back end of the first round. I think I would have had a little bit more leeway with it for at this point, just because you didn't trade up to do it. You stayed in your spot and you took a shot. And even if he's not great, he's on a rookie quarterback contract. So if the Vikings had gone that route, I wouldn't have hated it. It wouldn't have been my favorite, just because as I sit here, like watching quarterbacks, like it wasn't my favorite quarterback out there, but I would trust the Vikings a little bit more than I would trust my eye when it comes to developing quarterbacks. And you certainly would put him in a decent situation with Justin Jefferson. But overall, it was a bit of a sigh of relief for me at this point. We talk a lot about wanting to like take advantage of that rookie quarterback contract, but if you don't hit or if you don't like it, you shouldn't just take a guy to take a guy. So that's just how it goes. And so I'm happy they didn't go with Will Levis. I think it was probably smart to go wide receiver or cornerback. They obviously go wide receiver. We'll see if he kind of is one of these last picks in the end of this round. We haven't obviously gotten to that point yet. If someone comes and tries to trade up, the Falcons could do it. Several other teams could do it. But yeah, we now have 2 years of evidence of the mock drafters, the prognosticators. I think, again, everyone just sits here talking about it for months on end, and we all hear about how important it is to get a quarterback. And I think we just implicitly bring these guys up the draft board when they're certainly not worth it. And clearly what we're learning tonight is Will Levis is not worth that first round pick.
Yeah, no, that's entirely correct. And that, those very, very poor numbers, they mattered. His poor performance in the pocket, the fact that he took tons of hits, the fact that he made tons of mistakes from clean pockets, did not have even good statistics when playing in a clean pocket. All of these things would be very disturbing. And I think if there is a lesson of the future, it's when PFF gives you a stat that the dude gets sacked a bunch or that he's under pressure all the time, and you watch him and he's not processing it quickly and he's getting hit tons, the NFL's not going to like that. And that was the Malik Willis problem, and that's the Will Levis problem. And I think that's actually the Hendon Hooker problem as well, as great as he is accurate down the field, because you have to be so good when it comes to in the pocket of navigating that. And we saw it with Kellen Mond, where he just couldn't see it in the practice field and never got on the real field. And even when he did in preseason games, it was miserable because he just could not process what was going on quick enough. There's like 20 dudes in existence at any time in this universe who can do that. And if the NFL thinks you aren't one of them, they are not investing in you. And when he at his pro day couldn't even throw accurate passes on intermediate dropbacks against no one, it was a pretty clear sign, or in hindsight, I guess we could say a pretty clear sign that the NFL was not going to like that when he didn't have a very good pro day. I guess what I just tend to rage against is the idea that, people watching TV tape and looking at, whatever, taking wild guesses are telling us enough about these players that the NFL is actually going to see with all of their resources. That is kind of what drives me nuts, is you have Redditors saying this or whatever. And it's, oh, well, the Vegas line has this or that. Well, the Vegas line doesn't matter because they don't know either. The only people that know are in those buildings. And once again, it is proven. But I don't want to get too far off track, because I want to stay on just the general thing of they didn't pick a quarterback. They picked a receiver that we all like. But that means, Paul, that quarterback is either Trey Lance or next year, unless they pick one in the third, but that's not a future quarterback. That is a total lottery ticket. How do you view what happens at quarterback now that they have decided to create a cocoon of players that are good at football around whatever quarterback they take? I mean, they've really just, whoever sits down in that chair, QB1 in 2024, is a golden throne of talent around that player and the situation, but we don't know who it's going to be. So what is your opinion on who it's going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it really is just kind of passing off the risk for another year. Obviously, there's risk involved with Will Levis. There's risk involved with anyone they would have taken this year. And now you're just kind of pushing that back a year. And you're saying, we're going to go into next year, and we clearly don't feel like Kirk Cousins, we're not confident Kirk Cousins is the solution moving forward. And so to me, there's a lot of risk with Will Levis, but there's a lot of risk for waiting. There's a lot of risk on betting on Trey Lance if they want to go out and trade Trey Lance. There's a lot of risk if they want to try to extend Kirk Cousins again. There's a lot of risk if they just roll into next year's draft and feel like they need to draft a quarterback. That's not a position you want to be in heading into next year's draft, where you feel like your only option is to pick a guy, because that's when you end up with a Christian Ponder situation, or you end up in a situation where you're trading a ton of draft capital to go up and get someone, or you're just dealing in kind of the mediocrity, you're mired in the mediocrity where you're going to get a Marcus Mariota or something like that. So obviously every year we do this with the quarterbacks look a lot better for next year, but I don't know how much different this Vikings roster. I mean, I don't think they're going to win as many games as they did last year. Obviously, we know a lot of that was unsustainable and they've lost some players. But in general, we know a Kirk Cousins-led team, a team with this much talent now on the offensive side of the ball, they're not going to be horrendous. They're going to end up picking in the mid-teens, late teens, early 20s. That's just how this goes. And so they had a chance to draft a guy who a lot of people had in the first round this year. They didn't do it. And so now they're shifting that risk to next year, pushing it off for a year. And while I think that's the right thought just based on the prospects that were available to them, it just puts so much pressure on them next year nailing it and figuring out exactly what they want to do. It really heightens it, and it makes us look like fully squarely at that 2024 offseason. They certainly have some flexibility in what they need to do, but to me, it's just they're passing the risk down a year, and that could turn out to be a good thing. That could turn out to be a bad thing. One thing is at least they're going to have a better situation around him with Addison now in the building than they would have if they tried to draft someone next or this year and then let him sit. So that's one positive, but really, I think it's just they're still kind of stuck in that purgatory, I think.
I think that is true for right now, and we'll see if that changes. It could even change if they trade into the first to get Hendon Hooker or something. Now, if they did that, that was great. Like, we're talking about all this stuff, and then they trade into the late first and take Will Levis anyway. Maybe that's possible, or Hendon Hooker. But Jonathan, what do you got on from Chris Mortensen?
So I got a couple things here. Just want to put this out there beforehand, seeing tweets that Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell have delayed post-pick press availability for an hour. So could they be looking, I don't know that they have enough draft capital to do it, but could they be looking to trade back up into the later parts of the first round? That is interesting. But Chris Mortensen saying why Will Levis is dropped is that his left toe that caused him to miss 2 games last year was, quote, problematic For one team that considered him, Levis says the toe has healed and good to go. Another team believes Levis could manage it, but thought surgery would need discussion after the season. Levis tends to disagree with that, according to ESPN's Chris Mortensen.
Okay, so not just the, and this is another thing, always under the category of stuff we can't know, medicals. I mean, the Kobe Dean last year ended up in the 3rd round, even though, he was probably a better prospect than that. Dallas taking Maisie Smith here, by the way. The Bills took a tight end. Who cares? I don't know why they did that. A tight end, like they need other stuff, but that's not the point. We're not going to debate that. Look, if they trade back into the 1st round, and now we really have to wait to the end of the 1st round to sign off, because if they trade back into the 1st round and take a quarterback, some things are going to feel a little different from what we were just talking about. But I agree with you, Paul, that you are kind of pushing that decision down the road. At the same time, what's behind door number 2 or nothing? And that was like this year, there may have been nothing. It may have been, there's too many questions about Will Levis. There's too many questions about Hendon Hooker to pin your futures on them. And with Anthony Richardson going number 4, there's no other choice. Who would you rather have? Nothing, or, or someone you don't want? That was the last thing that I would have ever said the Vikings should do, which would be, hey, why don't you just take someone just to take someone? There might be some argument for that if you evaluate him as a 1st-round prospect, but there's no argument for saying a former quarterback as your head coach in Kevin O'Connell should be paired with someone he doesn't believe in. I mean, that is not something I ever would have asked him to do. So then what's your other choice? Your other choice is to ask about Trey Lance. Your other choice is to go into next year. And like you said, let's say you get the 16th pick, but next year they might have more draft capital to work with. Or next year, knowing that all these other foundational pieces are set on offense, you can trade whatever to get up into the top 10 to take that quarterback. And even if that doesn't happen, there will be quarterbacks who are disgruntled. There will be free agent veteran quarterbacks. There will be things happen in the league where guys become available that you did not expect before based on whatever happened. So, I guess I just think, sorry, this is too funny not to put on the board. Tom Brady takes a year off and then signs with the Vikings. Gosh, you just never know, right? He does have a Minnesota connection, is my understanding. So you never know. But they would have a chance to do a lot of different things then, where the options right now are just not favorable, unless it was going to be Lamar Jackson, but that ended today.
Yeah.
So I think that the as far as the big takeaways here, Paul, before I let you go, and thanks for popping on here. I know you were just chilling and enjoying the draft, but I think the big takeaway here is they understood that Kevin O'Connell's offense needs 3 wide receivers. That even though I know that they signed a backup tight end or whatever, but they need 3 receivers. They need as many people getting open as possible. They wanted a replacement for Adam Thielen that might be Adam Thielen-ish, but earlier Adam Thielen, like the route running, the ability to get open, the intelligence, the ball tracking. That's what they're looking for with Jordan Addison. I don't think that Jordan Addison is some sort of crazy burner. I don't think there's anything freakish about him. I think that everything is technical, which we've seen, I think, have more success than freak talent is the technique. And he'll be a good fit. And whoever was going to be this pick would be a good fit because Jefferson takes all the pressure anyway. So the big takeaway there is they're pushing the chips in on offense, and they want to have an elite offense next year. They want to have an elite offense going forward with their former quarterback at the head coach position. And they're trusting Brian Flores here, which I guess is another storyline because we got so focused on the quarterback that we need to talk about before I let you go is just that there were corners on the board, Deonte Banks, Joey Porter Jr., and even Nolan Smith on the board as well. And they said, you know what? We're not going to go with those great defensive prospects. We are going to trust in Brian Flores here and our ability, which they could still do if they trade some people, Dalvin Cook, so forth, to add a little bit more on defense and then develop players. And this is something they talked about a lot. The Josh Metellises of the world, the Caleb Evans, guys who are not necessarily top draft picks, they're really going to ask them to develop and become key players. But I think it's a pretty tough it's a pretty tough defensive setup for them going forward. Not that I thought any of those players would have totally changed it for this year, but even as rebuilding this defense is not easy when you don't take top guys on defense. And I think we've seen that over the years.
Yeah, I would expect it to be pretty defense heavy the rest of the way with this draft, with the limited picks that they do have. And yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the age-old question that we talk about a lot here, offense, defense, and which one's more valuable and which positions are more valuable. And I think just kind of, again, the surplus value you can get from a wide receiver, just the kind of game-breaking ability you can get from a wide receiver is just that much greater than a cornerback who could play super well, but if you have a nickel that sucks and just is getting burned, it's not going to matter how great he is out there. And so clearly they need to raise kind of their weakest links on defense, and they certainly still have some weakest links that they probably want to get out of there with some better players to put in. And that's what I would anticipate over the next few kind of picks in this draft. They try to address some of those things, but I think it's going to be obvious the defense probably isn't going to be great next year, and they're going to be relying on their offense. And I think that's probably a better way to go than to try to be marginally better on defense with one pick in the addition of Brian Flores, and then your offense being the same. I think your best bet is to just try to have a gangbusters offense that is putting a ton of pressure on the other offense to go score, which then creates turnover opportunities and puts you in a better spot, and you're forcing them to pass if you're up on them all the time. Like, I don't think the Vikings were in a position with this draft to fully solve the defense in any respect. So I think kind of leaning into your strengths can be a winning strategy for them moving forward. It sets them up better moving forward for whatever quarterback takes over, as we said. And yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on Brian Flores. It puts a lot of pressure on the remaining pieces that they still have on that roster. But I think both for a long-term perspective and a short-term perspective, like, I think just leaning fully and heavily into the offense is the best way to go. Certainly that's going to appease Kevin O'Connell after they drafted Lewis Cine in the first round, who's another guy that you're hoping you kind of get back and can regain that form. So I think overall, I like it over taking a cornerback. I just think I'd expect them to hit defense pretty hard the rest of the way. And I think they should, just to build up some depth and to build up some of those developmental players. So it doesn't have to be, your 6th, 7th, 5th round picks from previous years. It can still be 3rd round picks, 4th round picks that you can develop. Those are higher caliber guys that you put more trust in. So if we come back here and they've taken a guard and they've taken a tight end the rest of the way, then I'll have some more things to say about the defense. But right now, nothing bad to say about their process.
I would not be surprised if every pick from here on out was defense after this, but I am giving it nothing short of an A. Before you go, Paul, and then we'll get everybody's reaction and read some comments here, and we'll stay on until the 32nd pick, just in case something crazy happens. Why don't you grade it? I mean, we love to grading drafts is almost as ridiculous as trying to project where quarterbacks will be taken from year to year, but let's have fun anyway. I'm giving it an A. What are you giving it?
Yeah, I want to get like cheeky and say A-, but I'm not really sure what I would ding it for the minus. In terms of wide receivers, there maybe were one or two that I liked better, but they weren't on the board. So this is the best wide receiver on the board. So I give it an A. I think if they would have taken a corner like Joey Porter Jr. or someone like Deonte Banks, I think that would have been an A as well. I think they had a ton of great options here. I think what they could have done is kind of what the Giants did and just moved back one pick. I think they did, and grabbed a couple extra picks if that was an option for them. I think that would have been great, and still gotten a wide receiver, still gotten a cornerback. But aside from doing that, I think it's kind of the best thing they could have done if they just stayed pat. So I'll give it an A as well.
Paul, thanks so much. Thanks for coming on, man. PGAtour.com now, but you are invited for life to all big Purple Insider events. And I also know how much you love the NFL draft. And so how much every year you study it, you pay attention to it, and you knew that I was going to rant about something by the end of the night. You had to show up for that. I appreciate your time, sir. Off the clock, no longer intern Paul, no longer professional Paul, but PGA Paul instead. So PGAtour.com is where you can read his work. Very happy for you now getting going on that job, and proud of you, buddy. But thanks for coming on. And I don't know when we'll do it again, but there's always hot routes out there that need to be broken down. So you're always invited. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
Thank you. We'll make it happen soon. All right.
Take care, Paul. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Jonathan, have you been doing some sort of poll about how people feel about this? Well, you muted yourself, so that's not great.
Oh, there we go.
There
Let me pull up the poll again. This is a while. I asked if people are happy with the Jordan Addison pick. After 129 votes, 90% were happy with the pick. They're excited for Jordan Addison. Plenty of people in the comments saying they can't wait to see this offense of JJ, TJ, KJ, and now Jordan Addison alongside whatever they put in the backfield.
I mean, here's the thing. When you look at the two best teams in the NFC, I think we all agree who they are. San Francisco 49ers and the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's take a look at their offenses. Let's take a look at how they've drafted, where they've spent their draft capital. Weapons. A lot of weapons. I mean, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown was a draft pick that was sent. Brandon Ayuk, first-round pick, taken right after Justin Jefferson. That poor guy doesn't even get to be the guy that was like the best pick in that draft, but he's very good, and he's developed over the last couple of years to be very good. Deebo Samuel was a second-round draft pick. And then they found other guys like George Kittle. I think he was in the 5th, but he's become one of the best players in the league. How about Dallas Goedert? I believe that's a second-round draft pick for the Philadelphia Eagles. That these teams have stacked up weapons, and weapons just make your life easier. The Cincinnati Bengals just picked Myles Murphy. The Cincinnati Bengals, I remember, and look, I think Penei Sewell's a great player, but I remember when a lot of people said, how dare you pick Jamar Chase? You need pass protection. Your quarterback needs pass protection. And while that is still true that, Joe Burrow has suffered from some struggles there, Jamar Chase played a huge role in that team going to the Super Bowl and then having another shot at it this year. I mean, they are within a shoestring of going to the Super Bowl again this year. And it's driven by offense. It's driven by wide receivers. It's driven by playmakers. And look, I think this is what we wanted this team to be. I'm not saying you can ignore defense. You can't ignore anything. You have to be good at everything to win the Super Bowl most of the time. But this is what we wanted. We wanted a head coach and a front office that were going to do stuff like this, which is, you know what? Technically speaking, we probably need something else more, but we don't really because we need the most valuable thing more. And they replace Adam Thielen as well. Like that is a big loss. Adam Thielen caught 70 passes last year. I know that we all kind of were like, oh, well, Thielen wasn't the same, so whatever. He was still a pretty darn good number 2 wide receiver in the NFL last season as a compliment. And you add KJ Osborne to this mix, who I would just continue to say, like, don't sleep on KJ Osborne as a good player. It's just that this is the team that had 3 deep. And this is a team that's had a duo that has been unstoppable over the last how many years. And I really feel like it was the best move. Also, every year, just take a look every year where you have a lot of corners that get picked up in free agency or in a trade, and they turn out to be effective. I mean, last year, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, James Bradbury, like these guys just got picked up by Philadelphia. And San Francisco has kind of done the same thing over the years. So, I think that it's a really good strategy to set up also for the future for your next quarterback, but also lean into the thing that is going to win. And, some people that are upset about it, I mean, I guess there's really only that 10%. There's really only 2 ways to be unhappy with it. One is if you thought they should have drafted the corner. And I'll listen to it. Because look, the cornerback situation is very shoddy. And there were 2 really good cornerback prospects there. If you wanted
to still there. Joey Porter's
still there.
He's still there. Yeah.
Wow.
So if they're pushing back their press conference, which we've seen other GMs and head coaches almost come out immediately, the Buffalo Bills, Brandon Beane came out almost immediately after they picked their tight end and was talking about it with the press. So if they've pushed that back because Joey Porter's still there, and you've got 3 teams left, there's still maybe a deal there to be made to move up back into the first round to take one of the better cornerbacks in this class.
It seems like it would be not that easy to go from 87 all the way up So if you're doing it, then you really better do it. And if they're going to trade up, then they're not going to trade up, at least in my opinion, for one of those quarterbacks, because the quarterbacks are likely to make it into the second round. There's just no teams. Like you have right now is New Orleans, Philadelphia, Chargers. Like these are not teams that need quarterbacks. Or I'm sorry, Kansas City. These are not teams that need quarterbacks. They also might be trying to trade a player in this situation too. Kansas City could really use Zadarius Smith. I'm just saying, like they lost, I think, Frank Clark in the offseason. So yeah, there is a chance that they're still moving up, or maybe they're just on, just in general, on the phone, trying to see kind of how things are going to lay out for tomorrow and get things set up for potentially trading up tomorrow. But, I think if you wanted the corner, I am not going to tell you you're a fool by any means, because I think they need the corner. I think that they need to have that shut down number one guy. And I honestly thought that Joey Porter would get a lot more attention as that player. He was consistently mocked in the top 15. And for him to not get taken, there's some issue with Joey Porter that the league is not enjoying. And I don't know what that is, but I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong for wanting a cornerback. I just look at wide receiver as harder to replace. I look at corner as there are free agent corners every year that are good at their jobs and good fits, and you can get them in free agency, where wide receivers, look at what was available for wide receivers in free agency. It was just nothing this year. And I don't think that that's going to change in the future. That's why I would lean toward that. I also think that if you don't have someone to take pressure off of Justin Jefferson, teams will put all of their attention on him and they will not pay for it. And we saw that in some of the key games from last year. I would say even the Giants playoff game, that they basically said, go ahead and beat us with old Adam Thielen, TJ Hawkinson, and KJ Osborne. And the Vikings, you know what? Kirk Cousins played a good game in that game, but when it came down to it, they needed someone else to make a play, and it didn't happen. And I think that you get Jordan Addison because of that. So I lean toward Jordan Addison, as it would have been my pick. I honestly think that it might have been my very first mock pick. We mocked it a bunch of times, or we simmed it a bunch of times. And I guess we mocked it into existence with the Vikings, but it just made so much sense from day one. But there are questions here that still remain, big questions for this team, including how they are going to build up the rest of this defense. They need interior pass rush. They need edge rushers. They need corners, and they don't have a whole heck of a lot of draft capital to do it. So we're on pick 29, Brian Breesy being taken. So now 30 and 31. And hilariously, Jonathan, there's only 31 because the Miami Dolphins decided to take Tom Brady on a yacht with their owner and try to get him to buy some portion of the team and then come back as the quarterback. That's a real thing that happened. And
wild. Just
we
wild.
We can never forget that. So we're down to the final moments. Can you tell me, since you've been keeping your eye on social media and listening to the broadcast, what the reaction was from the broadcast and from Vikings fans to them not taking Will Levis, not taking Hendon Hooker, and instead going with Jordan Addison?
There's been some question on social media as to why they picked a wide receiver when you have so many defensive needs. But overall, the reaction from most, including all the draft experts, has been very positive for the Vikings taking a very talented wide receiver to add to their weapons on offense. Because as we've been talking about, that's how you win in this league. Kansas City, the Eagles, San Francisco, they've proven that time and time again over the past couple of years that you need multiple weapons. You can't just rely on one stud guy. And the Vikings adding to their list of weapons on offense is only going to help Kirk Cousins this year and whoever their quarterback is next year. So I think overall the reaction to the Vikings taking Jordan Addison at 23 has been overwhelmingly positive for the Vikings this season.
Yeah, this is a hard pick to fail with. I mean, I really think it is, because it doesn't, like last year. Let's just think about what happened last year when they traded back, and they traded back as far as they did. It was like, okay, they must have an idea of who's going to be there at the back of the first round that we're going to take, that's a key position and so forth. And when they take a safety, there was just air that went out of the room of like, okay, but there are so many other key position needs here. You're taking a safety. Is that the right direction to go? It was immediately questionable. And Lewis Cine was a good prospect, but it was immediately one of those where you went, oh, where's the analytics on taking a first round safety? I don't really know if that's a good idea. So there was kind of a split there with the fan base, and the fact that they also didn't get that first round draft pick for Detroit moving up as much as they did. Lots of questions there. I don't think that there's many questions here. I think it's very clear that they looked at Will Levis and said, you know what? Nope, this is not the guy that we're going to invest our entire future into. And gosh, they're showing him again. And I just feel dreadful. And okay, so here's the thing. They're showing on the screen, ESPN Analytics had a 0.01 chance of, or 0.1 chance of Will Levis being here. That's not how odds work. It's just not. There was a decent chance that a quarterback, including him, who was pretty consistently across the board thought of as the fourth best prospect, of dropping all the way out of the first round. There was decent odds of that. Just based on mocks, they didn't think so, but based on common sense of what we have seen. And we started to talk about him as the Drew Lock of this draft, or the Jimmy Clausen of this draft. We started talking about that when, like, the fifth pick, that was a very realistic possibility. I mean, I just, when they put up a number like that, it just blows my mind. Like, this has happened every single year, that one quarterback is not as good of a prospect as we thought. And I guess Will Levis ends up being that guy. And there's also injury issues. I feel terrible for him. I hate this. I can't stand when they show the guy just agonizing over and over. But here's the reality. He gets past these next two picks, which he will. These are the Super Bowl teams. The odds of him being a success outside of the first round just plummet. And I guess it just shows us that he was never a legitimate first round prospect. And unfortunately for him, he's misled by a lot of analysts and probably people in his life that thought he was going to be taken much higher. So that's really unfortunate for him. But the fact that he ends up out of the first round, and so does Hendon Hooker, to me says the Vikings made the right choice. They picked somebody that nobody thought was, or they passed on somebody that nobody thought was a first round pick. And the only other question I think that remains here is, should they have traded back? Now, you need a partner to trade back with, and that it starts right there. So I'll be interested when we'll probably shut this down by the time I'll be able to hear, later what Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell have to say about this. And one of the questions, no doubt, will be, hey, did you guys consider trading back? The reason that I would be totally fine with them not trading back is, one, if nobody's offering anything good, you really can't do it twice. You can't have, if you're Kwesi, another year where everyone goes, dude, why can't you get anything in your trades? But I do think that not trading back is a question. But if the Giants were going to take Jordan Addison, and that was the guy you really wanted, and I think that there was a big drop off from the wide receivers between Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Jordan Addison. The next group is a pretty big fall off. So if you want to get one of those key guys, then you got to get them there. And if you're not, then you can't trade back if you don't think you're going to be able to get one of those guys. And the Giants, I think, were pretty dangerous for them. So we're down to the last couple picks here of the first round. Now, ESPN is showing Pittsburgh does not pick tonight, right? Do they pick tomorrow?
No, Pittsburgh moved up with the Patriots and drafted earlier.
Okay. Yeah. But wasn't that supposed to be the second round pick? I'm all confused because Miami lost their pick.
No, that was, they moved up, I think, 2 or 3 spots because. Okay.
So they do get to pick tonight at 32.
No.
Tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah, it'll be tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay. I only asked because ESPN was showing like the last few picks and they had 32 on the screen.
Yeah.
I was like,
pick
wait
32
a minute,
is the first
31. So I want to make sure I'm getting that right.
32 is the first pick tomorrow.
So, all right. We got is Nolan Smith coming up here. That's an interesting one. Another one that's worth talking about. But some of the guys that went, like once Kalijah Cansey went, that was off the table.
Mhm.
And if we go back, is just kind of in our final moments here of the night broadcasting, got to shout out to the guy who's wearing the Jim McMahon get up for on the broadcast, by the way. That's excellent. But as we go back to the very beginning, I think that this draft was really laid out for what it was going to be after the number 4 pick was Anthony Richardson. And then for the Vikings, what we knew was that there was going to be one big decision to make. Do they believe in Will Levis or Hendon Hooker? But really, Will Levis is the guy who had been thought of highly through this entire prospect, this lead up as a prospect. So that was really the big question, because we knew that there were going to be other good prospects on the board, like Joey Porter Jr., like Deonte Banks, like Jordan Addison, and even potentially Kalijah Cansey. But once he went, and once the run on receivers started, that was another part of it as well, where it was like the Vikings really have to take a receiver now. I don't think that they can move back too far, because that run on receivers has started, and teams are going to make sure that they are looking at someone like Jordan Addison. Heck, I mean, the Bills drafting a tight end, Jordan Addison might have been a target for them as well. So how far could you reasonably move back? I think the other theme of this draft overall, aside from, once again, we never know going in who the guy's going to be, but it's always somebody, is that certain teams still look at running backs, linebackers as being worth it. And one of those teams is the Detroit Lions and their draft. Now, let's consider something, though, about their draft. These things don't happen in a bubble. In recent years, the Detroit Lions have done nothing but draft key positions. They drafted tackle. They got lucky with a star receiver, but in St. Brown, but they drafted a receiver last year. So they have drafted these key positions, a pass rusher in Aiden Hutchinson, and then they went crazy in the free agent market with cornerbacks. So the Lions felt like a playmaker out of the backfield, the next Alvin Kamara, and a linebacker were the positions that they desperately needed to fill. And I can see the logic there. I don't like it or subscribe to it. I think, hey, look what Philadelphia does. Look what they're doing right now. Yeah. They just drafted Nolan Smith. Philadelphia just takes pass rushers until the end of the day.
Pass rushers from Georgia specifically.
And I buy it. Edge rushers, interior rushers, fat dudes. They just take them all. And I think it's a good strategy. So I think the Lions made a mistake, but I get it, because if those actually work out, if Jack Campbell is somebody that's really good for them, that's like having an Anthony Barr. I mean, that's like having someone who, and look, Anthony Barr, you can argue about it, what his contract was or whatever else. He was a big piece for the Vikings. And I think that teams had to really factor for him. So there is some value in what they did in the short term. I don't know if it's really in the long term. And I think they took a big risk there. Chicago just going very solid with Chicago. They didn't make any huge noise. They just decided, we're going to get our tackle and that's it. Philadelphia is a huge winner of this draft. I think the Houston Texans are big winners of this, even though they gave up as much as they did to get their future franchise quarterback and Will Anderson and not mess around. Aside from that, any thoughts, Jonathan, about the way that this whole thing played out?
I think the only questions I have are for the Detroit Lions, and you mentioned that it could play out, but the whole process for them, they got David Montgomery earlier this offseason, so they had the running back position already filled with David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, and there's rumors that he's on the trade block, so bringing in Jahmyr Gibbs might be as a replacement there, but you already brought in a running back. You could have, at the time, looking at who was still available, even when Jack Campbell was picked at 18, you saw Kalijah Cansey there. Could you imagine that defensive line of Kalijah Cansey and Aiden Hutchinson? That would wreck the rest of the NFC North and the rest of the NFC. And as we've seen from San Francisco and Philadelphia, stacking up at that part of the field on defense has helped those two teams so much. And Philadelphia just keeps doing it, adding Nolan Smith. That's their fourth Georgia Bulldog defensive member from that historic defense 2 years ago that they've added. So I think for me, Detroit, I think they're a clear loser tonight. I don't think they did a good enough job with those picks, considering what was still available. I mean, looking at that kind of ruins it for me, despite the fact that those two guys could become really key pieces to their team going forward. It just right now, looking at it, immediate reaction, I'm questioning that. And it's funny how you and Will were talking about how Detroit was doing such a good job of making these trades, and they're a team to kind of model yourself after. And then they go and make the running back pick at 13 and then a linebacker at 18. So it flipped for them really quickly for me. I'm dumbfounded by how Philadelphia keeps getting away with having the best first rounds of every team. It seems like every single year. I mean, continuing to draft good defensive linemen who have skills, who somehow drop to them every time, dumbfounds me to the point where it's just like they are playing this thing. They're playing the draft like a fiddle at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Detroit, if Campbell turns out to be this like Micah Parsons player who's rushing the passer and doing everything and is a complete monster, the problem is that when you draft Jordan Addison, if he's just okay, that's really good. That's a really good pick. If you draft Jack Campbell and he's just okay, then it's not a great pick for you, right? And okay linebackers everywhere. There's 3 okay linebackers in the yard right now, in my front yard. They're everywhere in free agency. But if you get an absolute monster, those guys can be, and I'm talking about the Fred Warner, the Eric Kendricks. So that's the one thing about it is and I just try to give the other side of that is that though it is a very high bar, if the bar is reached, how good was Alvin Kamara? How good was Christian McCaffrey? How good is Fred Warner? If you turn those players into those guys, there's going to be a problem. It's just that it has to turn into a DeMario Davis or a Alvin Kamara for it actually to work. So Kansas City's on the board, and
they're running the clock down.
Pick. What's that?
They're running the clock down.
They are. So if the Vikings don't make a trade here, then we will call it an evening and put our bow on it. And I guess we'll see. As you said, it's going all the way down here. But if they don't make a move, then we'll call it a night. And I think tomorrow night I'm going to go out to TCO Performance Center and just do a regular podcast after that, probably with somebody out there, maybe Will Ragatz. But I really appreciate those guys stepping on to the stream today. Just brought a lot. Paul Hodowanic as well. And can't thank you enough, Jonathan, for everything you've done here tonight. You're on for the whole thing. You're running the scroll. You set up this whole look, managing the polls, everything else. So just tremendous work as expected, Jonathan. Great stuff. So what about you, sir? Are you giving an A? You just going with the crowd here? You're going to give the same grade as everybody else?
Yeah, I love the pick. I think it's great adding more weapons to that offense because as I said earlier, adding a wide receiver to this offense when you just lost Adam Thielen, adding a young wide receiver to this core makes essentially your first 2 picks in this draft a wide receiver and a tight end who can help you out immensely. And yes, we're not going to get to pick that second overall or that second round pick because they traded it. But still, if you look at it that way, you're adding 2 offensive weapons to this offense for whoever the next quarterback is, because clearly it seems like they're going to move on from Kirk Cousins next season. So that helps him this season. It helps that competitive rebuild. Yes, they have plenty of holes in that defense that they still need to fill. But with the amount of defensive players that are still available, I mean, it looks like Joey Porter's slipping through to the second round, which is just astounding because it looks like, not to spoil the pick, but it looks like Kansas City's not taking Joey Porter with
At
31.
This point, you can spoil. Just tell me who it is.
It is, I don't even know how to pronounce that. It's the defensive end from Kansas State.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so Joey Porter slips through. So can you make a trade up to the top of the second round to grab one of the better cornerback prospects and help yourself out immediately in that department as well? And I think after drafting in the first round an offensive player, you're probably going to have to gift a bunch of defensive players to Brian Flores to help him kind of mature and develop into defensive stars for your team going forward. But I really like the pick.
I do too. I think they did as best as they could if they weren't going to pick the quarterback. And I have to say, I mean, it's crushing to watch this for Will Levis.
Absolutely.
It is just agonizing to do that. And of course they just show them. And I get why they do that, but what an incredibly tough night for him. I think Hendon Hooker is probably more realistic about his chances, but with Levis, when you're told you're going to be a top 5 to 7 draft pick and you fall all the way down the draft board into the second round, and who knows where he's going to be taken there, because the teams early in the second do not look like they're looking for quarterbacks. That even opens the door. Could the Vikings look at quarterback in the third round? Could they trade up? A lot of things. Could they make a player trade? Could they trade Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Cook? Like, there's so many options that are on the table for the Vikings tomorrow. Because they only have the 87th pick, I don't know about doing a live stream all the way through. Probably just look for the podcast and video after from TCO Performance Center. I want to be out there also for the press conferences tomorrow and things like that. But thank you all so much for listening, for following along. Some of you were on here in the comments for all 4 hours of this, and I just cannot tell you how much I appreciate your dedication. You guys are what makes Purple Insider so great and so much fun to do this. So thank you so much to every one of you. Thank you again, Jonathan, to all the guests. We had a ton of fun. I mean, this was great. This was great. I was so prepared. Just telling you all the truth. I was so prepared for them to trade into the second round and just be like, I don't know, guys, have a good night. Like, hope you had some snacks and pizza. But instead, the build up to that, Will Levis still on the board. The fact they don't take him, which I do not think was a mistake, passing on Will Levis. I think they made the right pick. So I just can't tell you guys how much fun this was to interact with you, to see your comments and everything else, to read them. You guys are hilarious as well. I couldn't put all the jokes on the board, but you guys are really funny as well. So thank you so much to everybody. You got a great wide receiver prospect, and you're going to get to see him pretty soon when it comes to this season, and that will be very exciting. And guess what? We can still speculate about the quarterbacks for a long time, which will be great. So good night, everyone. Good night, Jonathan. Thank you so much, and we will see you guys again very soon. Appreciate it.